Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1299 of the War News stream. And it is the Sunday night fundraiser stream where once again we'll try to raise some more money to help those in Ukraine. And in the meantime, we have very big news to cover. We are hearing that there's a U.S. military escalation near Venezuela, as strikes seem to be imminent at this point. The F-35s have also arrived. We've also seen that Poland's agreed to a major NATO troop presence in their country, and also Russian oil sites are struggling after recent attacks. And we have all that news and more, and it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world, as we have been able to hear of significant developments in practically every single region of the world as of today. Moving us on down into the Caribbean, we were able to hear that the United States of America has built up a significant force within the area, as the President of the United States has stated in questions about whether or not the United States will directly attack the nation of Venezuela. We'll see, generally suggesting that they will be conducting armed strikes against the nation of Venezuela here within the very near future. We have also been able to hear that F-35s of the United States Air Force have arrived inside of Puerto Rico, along with a large contingent of Marines, most likely attached to the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit as a part of the amphibious Ready Group headed by the USS Iwo Jima. We have also been able to hear further information as well from the Polish that it appears that the Polish nation, or the Republic of Poland in its official name, is starting to take on a large NATO buildup of forces, as we have been able to hear that the forces of the Czech Republic, France, Germany, as well as multiple other nations have started to mass inside of Poland as a part of Operation Eastern Sentinel, and also as a part of the Western or Far Eastern territorial deterrence against the Russian Federation and their ongoing Zapad 2025 military exercises. The Zapad 2025 military exercises today were quite significant, as the Russian Federation conducted air launch testing of the Zircon hypersonic missile as well as the Kinzhal, both inside the Barents Sea and also inside the Republic of Belarus. The Swedish Gripen JAS-39C actually intercepted a Russian Su-35 in the area of the Baltic Sea earlier today. The state of Ukraine has also been conducting significant sabotage attacks against the Russian Federation's key infrastructure inside the Leningrad Oblast, as a train derailment was caused today by Ukrainian partisans, which, if y'all know anything about railway sabotage, was an absolute feat of sabotage engineering, which led to the derailment of the multiple unit at the head of the locomotive, along with 15 cars behind it. Significant damage has been caused to the main line south of St. Petersburg, and it does appear that that main line will be blocked until recovery crews are able to move the incredibly heavy engines, the cars, off of the tracks, and then also effect some sort of maintenance to the roadbed and rails, which have been severely damaged in the course of the derailment and the sabotage that led up to it. We have also been able to hear that the Kurishi refinery is continuing to burn at a pretty decent clip at the moment inside of the Leningrad Oblast as well. The state of Ukraine has also been able to inflict high casualties onto the Russian Federation's armed forces throughout a large part of the front line, and have been able to hold the Russians at bay, practically from the very most northern areas around Vovchansk and all the way into the Zaporizhia plain just south of the city of Zaporizhia. The Russian Federation has also seen large explosions occurring inside of Feodosia, another significant city within the Crimean Peninsula, while China was also able to conduct a missile interception of a meteor overnight over the Shandong province. I actually have to admit that that was somewhat impressive. Nevertheless, we have a massive amount of news to cover over the past 24 hours, and we will be making sure to get you all into each and every single piece of detail and information that we have been able to get over the course of this one day. But before we get on into that, one last thing that I do have to point out is that tonight is a Sunday night, and we all know that what a Sunday night's all about. It is a Sunday night fundraiser for none other than Razom For Ukraine, and of course, we would love to see folks support the fundraiser, as all support goes directly to the nonprofit in question and helps them to be able to continue to save lives inside of Ukraine. Considering that Ukrainian citizens find themselves under drone and missile attacks every day, Razom For Ukraine is incredibly vital in not only helping citizens around the world know about the plight that the Ukrainian citizenry is in, but to also directly assist those citizens during the course of the attacks and the war at large. Nevertheless, moving on out of all of our introductory statements, it is time for us to get on into the news itself, and that is going to be moving us on down into the area of the Caribbean, as we have been able to hear that the United States of America appears to be preparing for a significant military action against the Republic of Venezuela. We have been hearing about this for some time, but it does appear that the picture is becoming incredibly clear today that this strike is only a matter of time, and another strike against the Republic of Venezuela directly is imminent. Inside the Caribbean, we were able to see a disposition map that was actually made by none other than Ian Ellis on Twitter. I massively respect people who make disposition maps because I've been working on my own, and they take an insanely large amount of effort. So I would have to give a huge shout out to Ian Ellis over on Twitter for making this force disposition map that we're currently using on stream, but this is currently showing all U.S. forces that are currently within the area and are a part of the U.S. task force that appears to be assigned to operations against the nation of Venezuela. We are able to see that at this moment in time, there appears to be 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers within the area, the USS Sampson, the USS Gravely, and the USS Jason Dunham, the Jason Dunham being the most famous of the group currently. We also are able to hear that the USS Newport News, a nuclear-powered fast attack submarine, is also somewhere within the area, although we don't know exactly where. That would be an OPSEC violation. And on top of that, the USS Lake Erie, a Ticonderoga-class missile cruiser, is also a part of the strike package that is within the area as well. The USS Lake Erie is probably the most potent of the group, considering that guided missile cruisers like the Ticonderoga are technically able to carry a larger array of air defense systems, at least on board, although we would also understand that the USS Lake Erie, a Ticonderoga class, along with all of the other Arleigh Burke classes that are a part of this fleet, all possess about the same amount of Tomahawk land attack missiles, their maximum capacity all being about 32 each. But combining the whole fleet together, it currently has about 140 Tomahawk land attack missiles at its disposal. On top of that, which is just the surface fleet and the subfleet alone that is within the area, we also understand that the Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group is also comprised of the USS Iwo Jima, a LHD, or a helicopter carrier for the larger part is the best way to explain it, along with 2 amphibious support ships, the USS San Antonio and the USS Fort Lauderdale. All encompassing, these ships are able to carry the 22nd MEU entirely on board, which is about a brigade-level element from the United States Marine Corps. Inside of Puerto Rico, we are also able to hear that the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing of the Fighter Attack Squadron VMFA today are also based inside of the area of Ponce in Puerto Rico at the moment. We can actually show y'all specifically where they're at. They are right at this airfield right here, the Jose Oponte de la Torre Airport. This used to be called, I believe, the Roosevelt Roads base, if I'm not mistaken. Some people may be able to correct me. I have been able to hear that name was thrown around for a while, and it appears that this base was once operational but decommissioned at the midpoint of the 2000s, but has now been reactivated at this point to house all of the U.S. forces that are currently in this area, including that of the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing, which currently houses 10 F-35B Lightning IIs inside of this base. On top of that, also at this base, we were able to hear that 2 P-8 Poseidon aircraft have been based, along with 2 MH-60SR Seahawk helicopters. The United States Air Force has been seen to be operating a wide variety of aircraft around the area of Puerto Rico and in the Caribbean, including the C-5 and C-17 heavy lift aircraft, which have been bringing in supplies and equipment of the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, and also the other supporting forces for the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing and other U.S. Navy forces that are now basing out of Puerto Rico. We also understand that the Thunder Chickens of the Marines are also in the area as well, also using about 6 AV-8B Harriers, which are the vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that the Marines use before they started to replace them with the F-35. They also have about 12 MV-22B Ospreys that have been publicly stated to be inside of Puerto Rico at the moment, along with 4 AH-1Z Vipers. These are fast attack helicopters of the U.S. Marine Corps, along with CH-53E Super Stallions, heavy lift helicopters of the U.S. Marine Corps, and 3 UH-N-1 Venoms, which are generally a utility helicopter. We also understand that there is 1 Coast Guard cutter, a littoral combat ship, the Minneapolis St. Paul, and a military Sea Lift Command, pretty much a tender, that is also around the area as well, although we're not able to hear whether or not they're directly attached to the task force. However, all of these forces are currently under Southcom's command, which is based out of Miami, Florida, and it is quite clear, based off of this buildup, that actions are getting very close to being imminent. And this is one of the largest buildups of U.S. forces that has been seen in the entirety of the 21st century in the Caribbean. Adding on to the belief that a U.S. strike is imminent within this area, we were able to confirm that more tankers are continuing to approach Puerto Rico, including that of a C-130J Super Hercules today. These are used by the U.S. Air Force and other branches to be able to prolong their missions or mission durations in the midst of action. This means that if these F-35s of Puerto Rico were used against Venezuela, these C-130s would be able to refuel them in flight and make sure that they were in air for longer, giving them a greater amount of loiter time and a greater amount of opportunity to strike at targets that may poke their head up and start to pose a little bit of a bullseye, at least on themselves, due to their own incompetence or due to their own rapid maneuvers. We also were able to hear from the President of the United States today that it appears that it's a little bit likely that something may be happening. The president did refuse to rule out strikes against Venezuela, and according to a statement that was given to Fox News today, when asked about whether or not the United States would be conducting strikes against the nation of Venezuela, the President of the United States responded, "We'll see," end quote. It's quite clear at the moment that the United States of America is building up a significant force within the area. We've already conducted hostile actions against the Venezuelans here in the past, striking a narco boat and also seizing a tuna boat, although it appears that that thing may have been carrying something a little bit finer than tuna. That Ultra is not the only thing that thing's carrying that's, a little expensive. They actually said that it's carrying nose candy, and tuna has been known to be quite a smelly sort of a thing that people like to put up their nostrils, at least. So it does appear that the United States is getting ready for some sort of an action against the nation of Venezuela. Venezuela has also been responding in the meantime as if there will be imminent action. We were able to hear that Maduro technically stood up the militia inside of Venezuela, which is about 4.3 million strong on paper. It's probably far less than that in real life. And we've also been able to see that the Venezuelans, at least prior, have conducted some hostile actions against the USS Jason Dunham in particular, which is a part of this fleet currently in the area, a U.S. Second Fleet, by buzzing the destroyer several times with F-16s that were apparently equipped with AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles. All of this put together has led a lot of people to wonder whether or not the United States of America is going to start conducting direct strikes, not around the waters of Venezuela, but directly within the nation of Venezuela itself. And it does appear that a lot of people are talking about what is going to be happening here in the near future, and what they are believing the future may hold for the United States military within the region, as well as the Venezuelans currently inside of Venezuela. And so, Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so these are certainly massive U.S. military deployments we're seeing right now. We're seeing a naval aspect, a very large Air Force aspect with the F-35 showing up, and also we got the Marines in there too. So we got a lot of stuff down there right now, and right now Puerto Rico is swarming with military equipment, so it looks like something is definitely imminent. Surely we wouldn't deploy all that equipment and then back out and do nothing. That would be quite extreme. So what is the U.S. plan right now? And it looks like 44% said the U.S. will strike the Maduro regime directly, while 34% said the U.S. will strike the cartel sites, and 5% said the U.S. will launch a ground operation, and 16% said nothing will happen, it's all a big bluff. And I honestly would say this, I'm going to stick with my opinion on this one. I don't think they're going after cartel sites. I don't think that's the real reason for this incursion into Venezuela. I think it is going after the Maduro regime because Maduro's made several very big mistakes. First of all, he's gotten very aggressive with the United States diplomatically. That was big mistake number one. Big mistake number two, he's gotten very friendly with our enemy, which is Xi Jinping in China. So also not a good thing either. And number three, he didn't share his oil, which is also another big sin. So between those three strikes, I think he is out at this point. So I'm with the 45%. I think the U.S. is going after Maduro directly. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to be with the 45% as well. I would generally believe that we're going against Maduro directly. Hey, you know, folks, I did a little bit of research today. I was actually trying to work on the force disposition map, but me being who I am, I got quickly distracted and started to read up on something that started to remind me of this a little bit, and that was the Spanish-American War. If any of y'all know a lot about American history, the Spanish-American War was actually called by the U.S. Secretary of War at the time, John Hay, a splendid little war. And it's an interesting one, at least with the sort of motives and intentions that were really, well, the publicly stated motives, but the real intentions behind the war. And it's one that I have to explain here really quickly because y'all will see a lot of parallels once I start to explain it. So, back in the day, we used to have a decent amount of the southern part of the well, not the southern part of the United States, but the southern areas of the south of the United States and Central America and South America controlled by the Spanish. Their control started to wane heavily throughout the entirety of the 19th century, and by the time that we went to war with them in the 1890s, really one of the last holdings that they had within this area was La Hispaniola, which is Cuba, as well as the Dominican Republic, which was a part of La Hispaniola, as well as Puerto Rico, and a couple of other smaller islands and holdings, and also, interestingly enough, the Philippines. The United States of America at the time started to spurn a little story that started to get people's heartstrings pulled in, and it was about the plight of the Cubans on the island of Cuba, and how the Spanish were mistreating them horrendously and just doing absolutely terrible things to them. And not only that, the Spanish were trying to incentivize the island of Cuba, pretty much exploiting the people of Cuba to produce loads of sugar at incredibly cheap prices to import to the United States of America to try and destroy the humble American sugar farmer, the cane sugar farmers of southern Florida. We started to spin the story a great deal, but the reality of it is that the United States at the time was trying to expand their influence around the globe, and Spain was a great candidate to have some territories exchanged with us. The Philippines was in an amazing location, and not only that, the Caribbean islands of Cuba and the Dominican Republic, as well as Puerto Rico, were amazingly great locations to ensure that the United States could force projects further south throughout the entirety of the Americas, and specifically around the strategically important Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea. So, we sent the Maine down to Havana. And the Maine blew up. Everyone knows this story, I'm very sure. The USS Maine exploded inside of Havana Harbor. Now, nowadays, we actually know that it was a boiler explosion that actually resulted in the sinking of the USS Maine. It was not a bomb that was planted on board by the Spanish. But when it blew up, everyone in America went with the old saying, blame the Maine on Spain, and we blame the Maine on Spain. We went to war with Spain, and we absolutely stomped them. It was an unbelievable, resounding victory. It took very little time, and of course y'all would hear of the famous stories of the Battle of San Juan Hill in Cuba, with Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders taking the hill, going up against the Spanish and their Mausers, so on and so forth, and also the Battle of Manila Bay, where the United States pretty much defeated the Spanish fleet in that area, along with the Spanish garrison, and pretty much took control of the Philippines. Afterwards, that is what actually got us the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico, and also liberated, in a sense, Cuba and the Dominican Republic from direct Spanish control. Now, let's talk about what we're hearing in the modern day, now knowing the real intentions behind what the U.S. was doing back then, which actually ended up serving us quite well in the future. Let's talk about what is going on in the present day with Venezuela. We're hearing about the plight of the cartels, which I want to make a little bit clear, span throughout the larger part of northern South America and throughout all of Central America, and how they're using Venezuela, unlike the historical centers of the cartels, which is Mexico and Colombia, as a drug trading hub, and the plight of so many Americans who truly are dying from fentanyl-laced drugs and other kinds of narcotics that are being shipped in illegally by these cartels, and also the terrible plight of the Venezuelan people who are under the dictatorship of Nicolas Maduro, which actually isn't really that much of an exaggeration. We have to stop this terrible drug trade that's happening in America that's been killing tens of thousands of people, and not only that, liberate the poor Venezuelan people from their plight under the regime of Nicolas Maduro. Now, that is the public statement, but the realistic statement, in my opinion, I'd have to go with the 45%, is that we are trying to get rid of the Maduro regime. Maduro is clearly aligned with the BRICS alliance, and while a lot of people really wouldn't get those strategic big pictures in public, and so the story is different on a public footing, this is something that is quite prudent and important. Allowing enemy-aligned nations to exist inside the Americas can end up becoming a direct threat to the United States and our security and the safety of all of the citizenry watching the show right now. And for that reason, it's incredibly important to try and curb enemy influence, that of the Chinese or the Russians, inside of the Americas whenever the situation arises. And at this moment right now, the situation is pretty decent. The Venezuelans have openly provoked us diplomatically and militarily at this point. We have also started to build up a pretty decent, credible story, at least for the public and for the larger part of the world to hear, that we were trying to fight illegal cartels. And so with all of that put together, this doesn't really look like we're trying to go up against the cartels specifically. I mean, it's a noble goal when you hear about it on paper, but the reality is, if Venezuela falls, the cartels continue their operations in Colombia, Mexico, and the other Central American countries, and there's really a hill of beans of difference on whether or not that's going to change anything. It really won't. But one thing that will change is that the only Chinese-aligned country inside of the Americas, at least in any major form that's significant, will no longer be Chinese-aligned once we're done with them. So that would generally be my belief. We're going up against the Maduro regime directly. We're not trying to go up against the cartels, because that wouldn't really stand up on paper on a strategic analysis standpoint, because the cartels operate in an international sense throughout this region, and so dealing with one country isn't going to fix the cartel situation at all. In fact, it wouldn't even dent it. They'll just keep operating out of Colombia and elsewhere. But nevertheless, we also have another question from folks about the current developments that we were able to hear about the seizure of the tuna boat that happened yesterday. And I do understand that a lot of people are talking about whether or not that was actually an illegal operation, as it actually was conducted inside of the territorial waters of the state of Venezuela. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so this is specifically in reference to the tuna boat that we saw yesterday. The tuna boat that got stopped and boarded by the U.S. Navy apparently got stopped and boarded in Venezuela's economic zone, actually, in their own waters. And analysts are saying that's actually illegal, which technically it is illegal, but the question is, should the U.S. stop doing this? And it looks like the poll is almost evenly split. About 40% said no, the U.S. is justified in doing this, while 38% said yes, the U.S. is going overboard, and at 12% said I'm 50-50 on the question. Now, technically, like I said, it is illegal. Technically, the U.S. can't stop and board vessels in Venezuela's economic waters, so I would say they should stop doing that. But here's how you fix it. Back up a few nautical miles into international waters and stop them when they get out there. That fixes the whole problem. So I would say just do it that way. We really can't be going into people's economic waters and doing this. Because if we start with one country, we can basically do it with any country at that point. And at that point, what does the law matter if we're going to break every single law out there? So there is a way to solve it very simply. Just back up a few nautical miles, like I mentioned, and start boarding them that way. But I would say probably not violating the law here would probably be a good thing. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that it's a bit of a toss-up. I see that it's also a toss-up in the poll. One, we do not recognize Maduro's government as legitimate, so we're generally questioning the legitimacy of the Venezuelan government at all, and also their sovereignty over the nation. But at the same time, they are a recognized nation in the United Nations, and they actually do have a seat there. So generally, at least for international purposes, Venezuela is a legitimate country. We just have a question of legitimacy with their government. So I would generally say that it's not a good idea to seize these ships inside of Venezuelan waters, unless if we are declaring an act of war or conducting warlike actions as an extenuation of that particular incident. There's a little bit of a nuance with that, in that we cannot start doing that sort of a deal and set a precedent for that, because that means that any country anywhere could start to violate the sovereign waters of another country, and we've pretty much laid out the precedent for them to be able to do that. That starts opening up a whole bunch of can of worms for possible escalations elsewhere around the world that we would generally want to avoid. As everyone knows, we're pretty much on the brink of World War III already, so why in the world give people an open door, at least with the precedent we're laying out here, to possibly start violating the sovereign waters of other countries, or that might turn into a full-blown shooting war over who controls those waters? Probably not the greatest idea. I would have to agree with Enforcer Matt that it would be a much better idea to only inspect or seize vessels that are inside of international waters off of the coast of Venezuela, not inside of territorial waters. When they're in territorial waters, at least for now, they're safe. If we start to conduct warlike actions against Venezuela and we're pretty much in a default state of war, then it's entirely fine to go into their territorial waters and board and seize these ships, because at that point we're pretty much at war.
And also, there's a hole in the U.S. argument. You might notice this. You might have caught this. I think the U.S. was saying that they had to go into Venezuela's economic waters, because if they didn't, then the vessel would have never entered international waters, and they could have never boarded the vessel legally. Well, here's the problem, though. The U.S. is saying the reason for boarding the vessel is to inspect for, I believe, drugs and paraphernalia like that. So if the vessel is not leaving Venezuela's waters, that means they're not smuggling drugs somewhere. Because if you're trying to smuggle drugs, you'd be taking them obviously into international waters and to a foreign country. But if they're not leaving Venezuelan waters, that means they're probably not transporting any type of drugs or narcotics. So that kind of blows the argument apart right there a little bit, because if it's not entering those waters, they don't have the right to inspect it under international law. And like the enforcer mentioned, if we start doing this and breaching the law right now in Venezuela, that might give China the same justification to do that near Taiwan as well. So we don't want to open a can of worms with that. The laws are there for a reason, and even though they may be inconvenient right now, it's important to keep them there, because if not, then all these other hostile countries might think, oh, well, we got a free pass to do that too. We'll just start violating the law all over the world.
And also, I see some people saying, well, our enemies do that already. They don't, actually. Our enemies in the Russian Federation, at least, do violate Ukrainian territorial waters on a daily basis, but that's because they're in a state of war, so that's generally expected at that point. Nobody else does that, actually. The Yemeni Houthis do attack international shipping in international waters, but that's because they're a terrorist force. So obviously they're going to conduct terrorist-like activities. The Chinese, however, have actually never violated the territorial waters of the island of Taiwan, and even still hardly skimmed the air defense identification zone with their aircraft around the island of Taiwan. So like Matthew's saying, there's a lot of credible logic there to say that if we start to violate the waters of Venezuela, which is a Chinese-aligned country, who's to say that China wouldn't start doing that with Taiwan under the guise, at least, in terms of an argument, well, the U.S. is doing that to Venezuela, so it's totally fine for us to violate the territorial waters of Taiwan. That could start to create some sort of a potential conflict in that area. Better yet, another example, still in East Asia, could be that the North Koreans start to violate the maritime demarcation line here west of Seoul, and then start to state, well, that's because America was violating the sovereign waters of Venezuela, and for that reason we can do that against South Korea. And then that could start to evolve into a shooting war between the South Korean Navy and the North Korean Navy around the maritime demarcation line. There are loads of different examples that we could point out where those sorts of instances are going to be happening. Also, really quickly, folks, some people are saying the Philippines. There's actually a little bit of a nuance to that. There's a difference between territorial waters and exclusive economic zones. Exclusive economic zones extend much farther off of the shore than that of territorial waters, and so all of the situations and developments that y'all have been seeing where Chinese Coast Guard vessels are spraying down Filipino fishermen on board their fishing vessels, those actually occur inside of exclusive economic zone waters, which are way farther offshore than the territorial waters extend. So they're not actually conducting those actions inside the territorial waters of the Philippines. They're actually conducting that within their exclusive economic zones, which is technically a different thing. So I hope that addresses that side of things somewhat well, because there's a lot of nuance and also a great deal of confusion that surrounds the difference between an exclusive economic zone and a territorial water zone. But that's the difference, and even still, China has not violated the territorial waters of the Philippines, just the exclusive economic zones from what we know, and also what the Philippines publish. But anyways, with that, I hope we went through that nuance somewhat well, at least with the difference between territorial and international waters. And also, folks, we always have to make sure that the United States tries to follow the letter of the law, at least internationally in foreign policy, as much as we can. There's really no reason for us not to. We can provoke the Venezuelans, because generally what this is, it's a provocation that we're trying to conduct at the moment to get the Venezuelans to shoot at us, so that we will have a defensive justification to go all in. And that's kind of what we're doing. We can easily do that in international waters, or we can do that in another way rather than violating their territorial waters and starting to breach international maritime law. That's not really a great thing to do. However, also another loophole that exists in this is that the United States actually did not sign, and neither did Venezuela, the United Nations, I forgot what the exact designation for it is, but it's something about United Nations maritime laws and their charters. We actually did not sign the most recent version that technically makes this act illegal. So for us, it's technically not illegal, and for Venezuela, it's technically not illegal, at least under international maritime law, because neither nation is a signer of it. But still, this is a little bit questionable and could start to create justifications for further escalations by our adversaries against allied nations elsewhere. So probably not the greatest idea. But anyways, moving on from that, it does appear that outside of all of that news, the People's Republic of China pulled off an interesting one. Speaking of the Chinese today, they actually intercepted a meteor over the Shandong province with an air defense missile. I've never really seen anything like this, but take a look. That is a meteor. Here comes an air defense missile from an HQ-9, and they actually hit it.
Oh. I was also kind of crazy too. What kind of meteor made it that far beyond the atmosphere? So don't most of them actually burn up in the atmosphere? That's a pretty large fragment there.
A lot of them do, but I don't know about this meteor or how large it is. It probably isn't really that big. It's probably maybe about a foot or two across. They're usually not that large, but they actually intercepted it and hit it. I'm not going to lie, folks. That actually is quite impressive. I think this is one of the first times that a meteor has ever been intercepted by an air defense system in history anywhere in the world. So that was actually pretty wild. I actually, while China is an enemy of the United States, I will have to give them kudos on that. That was actually pretty impressive and pretty neat to see.
And also, why they feel the need to shoot it down? Because if it was burning up and it was going to hit the ground, surely it wouldn't have caused much damage. It's still going to have fragments, even if a missile intercepts it. So what was the rationale behind doing this, if you know?
I don't really know. I think it was just the fact that they wanted to do it, so they did it, because I didn't really hear a lot of justifications given by the Chinese Foreign Ministry today as to why they did that, but it was interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, it is interesting. And also, apparently, either China knew the meteor fragment was going to go to this area and they already pre-stationed air defense there, or China has a lot of air defense pre-stationed around their country, one or the other. Do you know which one it is?
They generally do have a decent amount of air defense based around the country. This would actually be within the Central Military District, which is generally China's most elite. So they are generally within that area just as a default. I bet you if I looked into the Central Military District, we could probably find that there's an air defense unit somewhere near Qingdao, I would assume.
Interesting. And also, I see a ton of people are very skeptical about that video. Some people are saying it's AI, it's fake or something. So far from what we can tell, it appears to be real, but I'm not going to jump to like any concrete conclusions because AI has gotten extremely realistic now. So it appears to be real. The Chinese are saying it's real, I believe, as well. And nobody's really disproven it. So until someone can like scientifically disprove that footage, then it appears to be real to me, or at least in my layman's opinion.
I would have to say that it looks to be real. I know a lot of people don't want to give the Chinese credit. I really wouldn't want to either. I'm not really a big fan of the Chinese, but at the same time, there really is no reason to make up that footage. Usually meteors like that, when they're in the lower atmosphere, aren't really traveling that fast. I mean, they're traveling about the speed of a normal ballistic missile. So it is entirely possible that they did intercept it. It's not out of the question. And so I would generally assume that it's most likely a correct video, and it actually is something that's real. The channel works off of video and picture evidence, and we've been pretty good at spotting fakes in the past. If this is a fake, well, it's a fake, but I'm generally not believing that it is. But moving on from that, and out of the People's Republic of China, it does appear that there's also a great deal of additional news that we've been able to hear today of the Russian Federation and its actions that it's been conducting in the Zapad. However, while they've been conducting their actions in the Zapad, NATO's been conducting its own actions, specifically inside of Poland. We were able to see that the French Rafales, which are based just east of Warsaw, were taking to the skies today as a part of Operation Eastern Sentinel or Operation Eastern Sentry.
Oh, yeah.
Look at it. Beautiful. Oh, also here's some pictures of those Rufola as well. Really cool. They're actually armed with Mika, well, Super Mikas most likely. But look at that, a beautiful plane. I absolutely love those Rufolas. They're beautiful aircraft. Also, we got to see more footage that was published directly by the French Ministry of Defense of their patrols that were conducted today inside of eastern Poland, which we can see in this clip. We see them lining up on the runway. That is actually a dual-seat Rafale. That's actually a little bit rare. And here's something else that's a little bit interesting. We can see with their loadout, these aircraft are actually loaded out for generally long-range missions only, at least in terms of air-to-air interdiction. They are only carrying the Super Mikas, and that's it. They are not carrying any Magics, which are the French version of an AIM-9, which honestly, that's a pretty cool name, calling a missile a Magic, because it makes stuff disappear, that's why. But beyond that, we can see them carrying only Super Mikas. And flying a really tight formation. Oh, look at that.
So nice. Look at that. So beautiful.
So cool. So incredible. We now see them taking a little dive here for a moment. Their ears must be popping so much doing that.
Oh, they don't do that. These fighter pilots, they're like barely human. Like these guys right here, they're superhuman.
Man, they're superhuman. Also, you see them loaded out with extended range fuel tanks. They have 3 fuel tanks on each Rafale, so these things are kitted out by just on the norm for incredibly long missions, pretty decently long loiter times. Also, I saw someone saying, what are the missiles on the end of the wings, on the wing pylons? Those are Super Mikas, and I'll pull up really quickly a Super Mika to show y'all what one of these would look like. Or at least let me just go type in a Mika EM. Here we are. So the Mika, this is it, the Mika. So these are the ones that are equipped. I believe it's something like an M530 by the French numerations or designations for their missiles. And let me make sure to check that. Yeah, it's the Super 530 is what I'm thinking of. But beyond that, these are an upgrade over the Super 530. I gotta correct that all. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm not incredibly familiar with French air-to-air weaponry. I know the Magic 2s and I know the Mikas, but apparently I was getting the 530s mixed up with the Mikas, 2 totally different missiles. The 530 is their version of an AIM-7. The Mika is their version of an AIM-120. So beyond that, those are the missiles that they're carrying, and these are AMRAAMs. So these are intended for longer range aerial engagements, meaning that they would most likely be firing these at about 70 to 60 miles out from their target, which means that these are entirely set up for longer range air interdiction missions instead of up close like the Ukrainians do, where they'll fire off a missile just several miles away from a drone with like an R-73 or an R-60M and hit the target pretty much dead on. These are made, well, these aircraft are pretty much loaded out to be able to conduct operations that are beyond or over the horizon, to where these missiles are fired, travel pretty much all the way across the horizon where they really can't see the target anymore, and then hit it all the way out there. So I hope that does address that well for some folks who may have not known about this missile, but it is a Mika. Still, we were able to see them still flying around a little bit. Just look at them, and then landing. Nice, wonderful landing there. But anyways, that was a great thing to see, and that's not all. That's not all, folks. There are other forces basing inside of Poland now. The Czechs have arrived. You know, whenever the Czechs get their units out into position, sometimes they get them mixed up a little bit. They get one in the wrong place here and there, and they call that check mix. But anyways, we can see them here.
I think you about to say checkmate, man. I was about to say, like, I was thinking that myself. I was like, I got to make that joke, that checkmate joke real quick. But yeah, they really did. They checkmated the Russians here.
Man, I gotta tell you, I actually heard, though, Matthew, that they did misplace a unit here, and so we'll call that check mix. I'm just kidding, by the way. They didn't misplace a unit. They all arrived at the right place at the right time. But here's one of the Czech, I believe it's an Mi-8 or an Mi-17, landing inside of Poland. They were also a part of the air defense mission.
They're going to pull up and check those Russians, I'll tell you.
Man, they about to do a fit check. But anyways, we also were able to hear the presidential decree today made by the nation of Poland that is consenting for NATO troop deployments to Poland. This allows foreign forces to stay under Operation Eastern Sentinel, bolstering defenses amid Russian threats. By the way, this is the new president of Poland, Karol Nawrocki, who also looks like he goes pretty hard. He looks like he doesn't play around. A lot of Polish people don't look like they play around. Outside of that, we also were able to hear that the Polish foreign minister, Sikorski, who's starting to make a name for himself, at least recently, rightfully so, he's making some really hard statements. But beyond that, he stated that NATO and the EU should consider intercepting Russian drones and missiles over Ukraine. Once again, Sikorski is based, like, absolutely. This guy does not play around. There are no jokes involved. When you look into those eyes, you can tell that if he was around during the times of the Polish Republic, he would have said something like, "Cut the phone lines, stop the spread of disinformation." He is not playing. So it is good to see that the Polish are still taking the situation seriously, and not only that, are continuing to further bolster the eastern frontier of the alliance. Nevertheless, a lot of people are talking about this Polish agreement today made by the president of Poland to allow for more NATO troops into their territory, and a lot of people are wondering whether there will be larger deployments as a result of that or not. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so what is going on with Poland right now? They've literally formally signed an agreement to let NATO troops onto their territory on a semi-permanent basis, and do you expect larger deployments than what we're currently seeing right now in Eastern Sentinel, the current operation by NATO? So it looks like 71% said yes, NATO will make a huge deployment very soon, while 15% said no, NATO will limit deployments now to Eastern Sentinel, and 10% said it seems like a 50-50 chance. And I would say that since they've now formalized this in an agreement, it sounds like this is either going to become a semi-permanent to a permanent deployment of NATO troops in Poland, or maybe it's going to be a much larger deployment than we're being told about in the public. So I don't really see why they would need to make that formal unless that was the case. And I think that's a pretty big sign right there that something larger is coming very soon. So I'm with the 72%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to be with 72% as well. I believe this is opening up the door for future large NATO deployments inside of Poland. And we do understand that there's a lot of countries that are considering that, including the Republic of France and the Federal Republic of Germany. So I would have to say that this is really opening up the door for them, because signing this sort of an order for Operation Eastern Sentinel is a little overkill, to be entirely honest with y'all, because there's not a large amount of aircraft that are a part of Operation Eastern Sentinel, at least at the moment. There's 2 Dutch F-16s, 3 Rafale, and 4 Eurofighter Typhoons at the moment right now, and 150 Czechs and a couple of helicopters. So really, that's not a large force, large enough to need to do something like this. This is generally allowing for NATO forces to be based in Poland whenever they would like to be, at least on a rapid basis outside of the U.S. forces, which are already inside of Poland. So with that in mind, I would say that this is definitely opening up for future deployments. Also, another thing that I do have to point out is that Germany is talking at the moment, and was talking yesterday, about rapid deployment preparations to Lithuania and creating some sort of a rapid reaction force or a quick reaction force to be able to send towards the area of Lithuania. Funnily enough, they kind of already have that in the 52nd Panzer Brigade, and let me go pull this up here really quickly, because I believe I can find this right here. Am I getting this? Dang it, let me go, German Army. Let me go find this really quickly, folks, because I'm apparently getting the brigade name not wrong. It's a part of the 10th Panzer Division, but apparently I'm mistaken. Here we are. So, this is the one. It's the 45th Panzer Brigade, but it's this one right here. The 45th Panzer Brigade is actually permanently based, and it's the only German brigade permanently based outside of Germany, and this one is already inside of Lithuania. So this is an interesting one, an incredibly interesting one, because, you know, throughout the whole of history, Germany has always been trying to expand eastwards in World War I and in World War II. And it's crazy enough, folks, that after the Germans gave up the whole ambition of conquering all of Eastern Europe, this is the first and only time we've ever seen a German unit permanently based inside of Eastern Europe. Who'd you thunk? The more you know. But nevertheless, this is a fairly well-off brigade, by the way. This is well-equipped. And let me see if I can show y'all, at least here. what they have, at least as a part of their brigade. They have the 122nd Panzer Grenadier Battalion, which is armed entirely with Pumas, which are one of their newest infantry fighting vehicles. They also have the 203rd Panzer Battalion, which is equipped with 44 Leopard 2A7s, once again the latest and greatest of the Leopard series of main battle tanks, and they also have the multinational battle group Lithuania that is attached to the 45th Panzer Brigade and is expected to be fully subordinated in February of 2026, but really is more so a unit on paper right now than it actually is under the direct command of the brigade. So this brigade is made up of 2 battalions, a Panzer Grenadier Battalion and a Panzer Battalion, and it's really well equipped. Like, this is a real heavy hitter right here, and it also has subordinate units that are attached to it, artillery and so on, that will become a part of the multinational battle group, which are operating the typical sorts of German equipment, Panzerhaubitze 2000s, so on and so forth. So a very well-equipped unit, and unfortunately it's not on our force disposition map yet. That'll be included when I add all of the German units onto the map, but that is really the only NATO brigade that's not from a Baltic country that is permanently based and of fighting condition that is in the Baltics at the moment. Anyways.
It's really wild to see Germany building up their military once again, because Germany is undergoing right now a major effort to rebuild their military. They want to be the largest military in Europe. I think that's what they were trying to do, or at least they stated that like 6 months ago. So they're currently building up, and also they're clearly trying to force project as well and help defend the NATO alliance. So, you know, Germany, they want to ensure that all of our living space inside of NATO is well protected, to say the least.
You know, I gotta say, it's a crazy thing, you know? Like, I think in other times in history, whenever the Lithuanians heard the Germans are coming, I think they were in absolute fear. Now they're like, the Germans are coming, yay! Like, they're like, yay, welcome them in! In fact, let's permanently base a brigade here. It's great to see how things have changed over the past 80 years. The world is healing.
Yeah, there's some people that are actually a little bit worried about Germany building up their military. Me personally, I don't think we have anything to worry about. I think all that stuff is in the past. All the other stuff that happened back in the day, you know, the war's in the past at this point. You got to sort of like just overlook that. There also, VJ Spectron said phrasing, Matt. Honestly, like, you do have a point there with the phrasing a little bit. I think I did kind of phrase it a little bit weird, but we gotta let the stuff go, folks. Listen, the war is back in the day. It's over with. The people got held accountable, and Germany today is not the Germany of yesterday. So I think we got nothing to worry about.
I gotta say, you know, I actually heard that there's this guy in Germany. He said that they're gonna make the biggest army that Germany's ever seen. They're gonna make Germany the greatest country in the world. Germany is gonna be overall. And funnily enough, that guy's like dead. Has been dead for like 80 years. So totally different time. Also, by the way, though, I do have to ask you a question. Considering that Germany has been on the losing side of both world wars in history, is it a good thing for them to be on our side? Because with their winning record, does that mean we're going to lose? Like, I don't know. Because right now we're betting 2-0 that the Germans will win a third world war. So I don't really know. I'm just kidding, by the way.
Yeah, but they were going up against everybody, though. I mean, Germany was throwing hands with everybody. So, I mean, they lost in the end. Thankfully, the really bad leaders in Germany at the time, they lost, thankfully, because that would have been horrific if they'd gone any further. But they were literally fighting every country out there. They were literally going for the entire world. So I think that's why they generally lost, is because they picked way too many fights. And also they had a horrible message they were running with, too. So this time, though, thankfully, Germany is sort of in the fold this time. And even though they're planning on building up a large military again, I would say that they've learned from the past. So I think we're good with Germany, thankfully.
You know, they were throwing hands so badly, Matthew, that after Pearl Harbor, a few days later, Germany said, oh, you know what, Japan, we'll do you a solid one. And then they declared war on the United States. That didn't go well. Like, that didn't go incredibly well. That was really the reason why they lost, because if they had never declared war on the United States, there was at least a chance that we may have never joined the war in Europe, meaning the Soviets would have never fixed their logistics, and Britain would still be largely on its own to fight the Germans. So if we had not joined at that point, it is entirely possible that the Soviet Union may have actually lost, and with that, the British may have just pieced their way out, considering that there was really no international front against the Germans rather than them. So kind of a bit of a lucky thing that they did that stupid move, but nowadays, we are friends. 80 years later, we're great friends with the Germans. We like Germany. They're really cool. They have a neat culture. They have pretty decent food. They have, like, cool architecture. You know, they're pretty good at art. The Austrians are a little bit better at art, but we don't talk about that. We just leave that behind. Like, we leave that behind.
It's kind of weird that now Germany, I think people view as a more safe military power at this point than the United States. And that's just the world opinion right now. It looks like a lot of people are very skeptical about the U.S. Military command right now. Me personally, I think that while I understand where the fear is coming from, I think they can rest easy. The U.S. is going to stay on the straight and narrow, even though the messaging is a little bit weird right now. But it seems like most people are very skeptical about us this time. It looks like many people think that the U.S. might be the baddies this time instead of a country in Europe.
Yeah, I have to say, but hopefully we'll be able to see that Germany does become one of the strongest armies in Europe, but they got a lot of catching up to do. They have to catch up to Poland, which is kind of beating them at the moment by a long shot. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that at least the best we can, at least to our extent at the moment. But moving on out of that and on into the rest of the news that we've been able to hear, at least around the area, Sweden also intercepted a Su-35 today. We actually got a picture from the interception. That is an Su-35. That is a Gripen. Gripen, Su-35, Russia, Sweden. Sweden actually intercepted a Russian aircraft today. That's the picture. And the aircraft did turn around and return back to Russia after a while. In the meantime, while all that was going on in our side of Europe and NATO, we were able to hear that the Russians were continuing their crap as a part of the Zapad, including the test firing of Kinzhal hypersonics, which was conducted today, which we can see right here. You see the MiG-31Ks taking off. The MiG-31K is actually specialized to use the Kinzhal hypersonic. No other aircraft in the Russian Air Force can actually operate it and launch it. I gotta tell you, you never realize it until you look at the cockpit of a Russian jet, but the MiG-31 is an incredibly cramped cockpit. That guy's head is hitting the ceiling. He's having to, bend his head down while he's flying this thing the whole time.
Yeah, that comrade right there, he's having a rough time.
Man, this comrade, he's a little rad the way he's having to duck down in this thing. Also, another funny note for y'all is that do y'all notice that hole up there in the top of the cockpit canopy? That's because the field of view on this thing is so bad, and this is a historical issue generally with most Soviet-era aircraft. It was so bad that they actually had to cut a hole in that thing and put a periscope on top, so that way he could look behind the plane through the periscope.
That's interesting. It sounds very Russian.
Yeah, it's very Russian, and it's really crude, and that's generally the worst type of design you would have, is where the field of view is so bad you have to install a periscope, because even still, it's a very limited view of what's directly behind your six and nothing else that is provided through the periscope. Pretty wild stuff. But anyways, see them flying around with the Kinzhals. They love to show them off. They suck. The Ukrainians have intercepted a gazillion of these things with the Patriots. They're hardly even hypersonic. They had to blur this guy's face out. He's so ugly, his mother.
He's a top secret pilot. Yeah, he can't be seen. It's wanted in the country.
We see them deploying the drogue chutes there to slow the jet down, and that was the end of the exercise. We also saw that they were testing out the Zircon hypersonic missile today as a part of the Northern Fleet, which was fired from the Admiral Golovko, which is one of the newer vessels of the Russian Navy, and I believe it is a frigate. It is. Thank you, Preston Stewart, for putting that out. It is, in fact, a frigate. I had to double check on that. But here's the clip of them test firing a Zircon today. Also, just in case if you couldn't tell by his rank, they made it incredibly clear because his shirt says Commander. So you couldn't recognize
the Dollar General. Where did he get that from?
Bro, he got that from Walmart. It says, "Hi, my name is Commandir." It's like, bro, you didn't have to spell it out that big. That's for all of the chronic alcoholics on board the ship in the Russian Navy. So that way, if they can't really tell what the two stars are because their eyes are so blurry and cross-eyed from being drunk, they will be able to recognize the black text on a white background in bold that says Commander. So just to make that a little clear.
The man's a master yapper. That's that guy right there that they were trying to get us to go after on Call of Duty. That dude, what's his name? Vadim or whatever. The main guy. That sounded just like him.
Bro, honestly, it kind of did.
Корабль на боевом курсе следует по графику. Отставания опережения нет.
Why are these guys eating the mic? Do they not understand you can have a little distance between the mic and the mouth? You don't have to actually eat it.
You know, they have the same mindset with the mics as McDonald's fast food folks do. You know, like they put that microphone in their mouth when they're on that drive-through. Like they'll be like,
Hello, welcome to McDonald's. What can I do?
and you're like, I don't even know what he's saying. Like,
Make sure the missiles in the right target, blade. You're gonna make sure the missiles are going to the right place.
dude, this guy's saying,
I have a freaking insane hangover right now. I can't really understand what the hell I'm even doing. Just fire the thing, damn it.
like that's what he's doing. But anyways,
Где? Одна, корабль точки пуска.
Есть пуск, начат пусковой цикл.
and there it goes.
Meanwhile, the commander's inside screaming, "Obliat, obliat!" You could hear him outside the ship.
And there it goes, off into the distance. And that was the end of the exercise, at least for the footage that they published over the day. Also, speaking of which, further news, at least about a little bit of the exercise kind of stuff. There was a little exercise that they did today all the way out in the Far East, near to the area of Vladivostok. They did some anti-ship missile test firings out here. Oh, wow. Look, it's the S-300P Bastion Ps. These are their modern anti-ship missiles. Or, as we would call them, the modern shit missiles. They're not really anti-shit, they are shit, but they like to parade them around and act like this is the greatest defense of the Russian coastline that's ever been seen. These things
I know that thing right there is a pain if those get stuck. Like, I can tell you right now, it's going to be a hell of a thing to try to drag out of a mud pit or something.
Honestly, dude, I'm looking at it. It's Le Brick. Dude, I think Elon was a part of the design team for this thing because it's very similar to that of the Cybertruck.
Man, I'll tell you, it's got like the same similar lines right here. Jeez.
Я раскат.
Uh-oh.
Бою. Система координат СК-42.
They got to dramatize this. They're like in a like a movie for HBO or something here.
I'm not gonna lie, Matthew, this is like my streaming setup.
Kind of does look like it. You got the little side phone on the side too.
Man, I do, man. I got the iPhone. Like, I got it all, man. I got it all. But it's more modern. It's better. It's nicer.
Тип ЦУ от ВНП. Опознавание цели чужая. Координаты цели.
And there they are. They're setting up the S-300P Bastion P. They only carry 2 of them each. So you better make sure that you hit.
Раскат. Я 121. Начало.
Dude, that guy had to give him the cue, like, okay, they're filming, go. He had to do a little head nod. He's like, okay, go.
Раскат. Я 121.
He said,
Начало
"Action."
операций. Старт.
This is Vadim's big break. He might get bigger parts after this one in a bigger movie next time. He's trying to star in World War III, the movie.
And there he goes.
That's very expensive for a country that's running out of money.
Running out. Oh, what the hell happened to it? Like, did you see that? Did you see that? Look at this. It's like it went
Yep, a little
errant.
malfunction.
Yeah, I think it went errant for a little bit.
Старт
Yeah, something's
прошел
wrong
в
with him.
кабине нормы.
And then he says everything's normal. It's like, I don't think so, man. I don't think so. That thing looks like it did a little twirly whirly up there. Look at that. That thing just ripped itself apart.
Then cut to the live Cope show. Everything is normal, Bliat. Don't worry. It's all under control.
Listen to him, folks. He's about to say it. Listen.
Старт прошел в кабине нормы.
He just said, the launch was a success. It's just normal. It's like, bro, it's not. It's not for sure. It's like, I think that thing was supposed to travel farther out to sea before it ripped itself apart. So looks
And
like.
also, why is the commander so scared to turn his head? Like, he will not take his eyes off that screen. Like, he won't even look toward the camera or anything. He's like terrified of the cameraman.
Dude, he's scared of the cameraman because the cameraman is Stefan Chuck. Stefan Chuck like knocked out the cameraman. He's sitting over there behind the camera. He says, "You don't look. Do not make face." And he's like, I'm not, man, I swear. But anyways, moving on from that, crazy clip of them doing the anti-ship missile test. And I think generally it looked like it was a failure, from what I can tell. Because I believe, at least in a normal test, that is actually supposed to go out and hit a target at sea. That one didn't really look like it did. It looked like it actually ripped itself apart about a half-mile away from launch.
Holy
Holy moly!
Triple six just doing a 400.
We hit the
my gosh,
goal!
look at that. We've hit the goal. Jugga, Igor. We smashed it. Look at that. We're $19 above the goal. I'll tell you what. Look at that.
We smashed the goblet just like that S-300B SMP smashed all of Russia's hopes and dreams for the future of coastal defense. Holy moly, I cannot believe it. We hit the fundraiser goal, folks, in about an hour. Holy smokes, people. Holy moly, that's actually crazy, folks. An absolutely crazy feat. An unbelievable achievement of the Lee Spring Army and the combined efforts of the whole of the Lee Spring Army in being able to reach this kind of an amazing and incredible fundraiser goal. And of course, before we move on throughout the rest of our news, because it's actually going to be moving us on into the Ukrainian attacks in Russia today, at least the ones that were conducted near St. Petersburg, and also all of the frontline news that came out of Ukraine today. But before we get into all of that juicy news, I do want to make sure that we give a shout out to all of the top donors. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so shouting out our top donors of the night thus far. We had that 400 that just came in from Trism 666, which got us right over the goal right there. And a huge shout out to Trism for that massive generous donation right there to the fundraiser. We also had a 250 from Mike Yunt. And thank you, Mike, as well, for that 250 right there to the fundraiser. We also have a 200 from Espen Turgenhagen, a huge shout to Espen, as well as a 109 from Steven Simon. And we also had a 100 from Char G, as well as a 100 from Hal Rose, Bobby 43, as well as Activista, and a 50 from John King and a 50 from Tyler Weaver. And a huge shout to all of our top donors and all the other donors as well that have helped us to reach the goals tonight. We have hit it in just about an hour. So very good to see that once again, and it's going to a really good cause for Razom for Ukraine. But Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta say, it's absolutely incredible, folks. We have hit $2,539 at this moment on the fundraiser within 1 hour and 7 minutes of the fundraiser start, thanks to all of y'all and your amazing support to this fundraiser. All of that is going to be going to help out Razom for Ukraine, and I got to give a huge shout out to the folks we were able to call out and all the folks who threw in support that we were not able to call out but made a massive contribution in helping this fundraiser to get to where it is tonight. It's truly amazing and unbelievable to think that about 1,300 days into our news coverage and 1,300 days into the war in Ukraine, we are still continuing to support American and Western interests around the globe here through the Lee Spring Army. So an incredibly huge shout out to all of y'all once again. An absolutely amazing thing. And I just have to say, it's truly amazing, incredible, really. And also, someone in the chat said, you talk like you have a direct line to the EU, US, and NATO. I don't know when we did that, but call me Hotline Bling because we're going to call up the foreign minister of the Czech Republic. But anyways.
You got anything you want me to ask him, by the way? I'll call him up right now if you want. I got the direct line to NATO right here. They got a phone number, that 1-800 number.
Man, they got that 1-800-588-2300 Empire. But anyways, also,
man, I tell you what, we're not trying to call it the Russian Empire now.
Also, I saw some people saying, "Oh, that test was normal. That was completely normal and fine." It wasn't. I'll explain a couple of things why. So here's the S-300 launch, graciously covered by the TOS logo. But here's the thing that fell in the water right here. This is the attitude adjuster, which is it's on technically on the nose of the missile, and you can actually see it at work on a large amount of Russian missiles. These things are on practically all of them, the S-300s, 400s, so on and so forth. But this is what allows for the missile to actually turn from a vertical position to a horizontal position right out of the launcher. This thing jettisons itself off of the nose cone, and that falls into the water. You'll see that hit here in a second. But the missile then goes traveling out here. You can see it going on out there. And then it's going, and then you can see that nose cap there splash into the water. That's what that is. So that was not an attitude adjuster that went wired here and then fell into the water. That thing had already fallen off a way good whiles ago in the video, and that's normal. The part that isn't normal, however, is the entire missile right here going a little wonky. That's the part that's not normal. So that one was quite odd. And that's why we're saying that appears to have actually been a failure that was caught on film. But anyways, moving on out of that, it's not like we haven't heard of a failure before of a Russian missile. I mean, we hear of them like every week. I mean, don't y'all remember when they were trying to test out the Sarmat and it blew up in the silo and literally obliterated the whole surrounding area and killed a couple of people? I mean, it's not like this thing is new. This has been happening a lot on every single missile system that the Russians develop. The Russians treat missile development like a gamer treats Kerbal Space Program. It's just you build some shit and it blows up and kills a whole bunch of people, and then you go back to the drawing board and then redo it until eventually there's like a quarter chance that it might work, but most of the time it's still just blowing up and killing a whole bunch of people around the pad. So anyways, we're going to be moving on on into some questions, at least for a moment, before we make our way into the second part of the stream. So, Matthew, what do we got?
And real quick, let's address the poll that's currently running right now. And the poll says Finland's president, the young fellow who showed up in the United States of America, and the U.S. president didn't even know who he was and had to literally say, "Where are you? Where are you? I don't see you. Finland president, who are you?" And it was literally sitting right in front of him. And he said, "Oh, there he is, right there." That guy. Finland's president says today that we are now seeing a shift in the world order. And do you agree with Finland's president? 72% said yes, the world order is 100% shifting. And 12% said somewhat, but not significant. And 9% said no, the world order is remaining the same. And I would say somewhat. I would say somewhat. The way the world order is currently changing right now is we're seeing the enemies of the United States solidifying in one big alliance. That is the main way in which it's changing, in my opinion. We're not seeing, like, you know, all of a sudden Axis supremacy or something like that. That's not happening. Of course, they are a threat, but they're not supplanting NATO nor the West. That's not happening right now. It could happen in the future, but it's not happening right this second. So I would say I agree with them in part, but not all the way, though. It's not something that's like an existential threat at the moment. Now, it might become one shortly, but it's not right this second. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to be with the 72%, but not necessarily in that the world order is shifting in the favor of the Axis. I would say that's really more so an internal observation on what's going on here in our Western sphere. Because of the United States' current operations, and this is, I want to make this a little bit clear because some people make it very political and say it's entirely, like, just to be straight up Trump's fault. Really, it's more so Biden and Trump's fault because they've been such indecisive leaders, just in my opinion, in foreign policy, that Europe has pretty much been having to take the reins on their own and kind of do their own thing without the U.S. spearheading and leading everything, with Europe following us and following our example. So it's really starting to change the world order, even with how things work here in the West, because we're seeing that leadership's becoming a lot more decentralized, or we're seeing the emergence of pretty much a consul system like you would have seen in Rome, where France pretty much has about the same voice in leadership here in the West as the U.S. has, because France pretty much represents the collective interests of Europe as a whole, as a part of the sphere, and is pretty much creating their own ambitions and spearheading their own projects, really without the U.S. being the one leading it from the forefront. And that's really how I took the statement today, and I'd have to generally agree with that. You can see that happening in real time. Really, you could honestly see that in the past administration, because the past administration was so indecisive. That's when we saw that Macron started to take his first steps to start to pretty much say, I'm going to lead Europe and everyone ought to follow me because we're going to do great things together. And everyone started to go, yeah, that seems like it might actually be a good idea because the U.S. isn't really active. It's like a dead frog that gets zapped with electrical jolts and the legs twitch. So we'll go with Macron because he seems to be, you know, vital and alive, at least with his leadership. Then the current president's come in and he's pretty much thrown that on in his head. He's definitely vital and alive, but pretty much flip-flops every day. He's blaming the Europeans for everything in the world one day and then saying that he's done with Putin the next. And then we're also indecisive on top of that anyways. So then everyone went, you know what? That thing that Macron was doing under the last president actually seems like a pretty sweet deal at this point. We ought to just listen to the French as far as their lead goes because they seem to have a little bit of a better handle on being proactive on things than the United States would right now. So I would generally have to say that that's where I'm seeing the shift in the world order coming from. And I would say that that's not incredibly bad. I mean, it's definitely not the greatest thing for the United States, but for the Western sphere, it's not the worst thing that could happen. The worst thing that could happen in the Western sphere is a complete split, which I don't think is going to be happening. But one thing I would have to say, however, is that the next administration, whoever they may be, they have to be far more proactive than the current administration and the prior administration in how they handle foreign affairs and also foreign policy, because the past two administrations are setting out such a lackadaisical and lackluster approach that we're pretty much begging for everyone in the West to pretty much treat us like a joke, like we don't even exist. We need to be out there leading the forefront, drawing up the plans, asking for foreign support from our allies, and coming up with things to do on those lines, instead of just pretty much leaving everyone to their own devices, to where the Western sphere starts to become far less consolidated and more so a confederation of alliances that generally doesn't have any sort of centralized leadership that they can look to and go, this is the current plan and this is what we're doing. So I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. And also, Matthew, I understand that we have some very interesting questions.
Indeed. So jumping into our first one here, we actually have one super chat that came in because the YouTube loophole still exists. And this one goes to OK State 42, puts in a 10. And thank you very much, OK State, for that support of the channel. And he said, why is the USA and NATO so afraid to strike Russia over the drone excursions? And peace through strength is obvious, and hiding under a school desk doesn't work, LOL.
So afraid to strike Russia. And really quickly, Mandy, I want to understand if I'm getting this question correct. He's asking about armed action against the Russians or striking at them in terms of sanctions, because I really wasn't sure which one that meant.
I think he's referring to actually striking Russia like with a weaponry, I think.
Then we generally avoid that, not because we're scared of them, we're scared of nuclear destruction, which would come around if we did something like that, because it would create a third world war. Or at least there's the high possibility that it could at that point if a world war does happen. So that's why we don't strike them. And generally, as far as that, I'm all for facing down the Russians, but going out of our way to provoke an actual war, it's something that I'm not really a big fan of. I mean, if war is coming and they're going to start it, we might as well be in the most aggressive stance we can be for when it starts. Of course, we'll still fight defensively at that point, but going out of our way to offensively strike them, I'm not really that big of a fan of. I'm more of a big fan of implementing sanctions against the Russian Federation directly and doing it that way. That would be a little bit more effective, at least in my opinion, and also make sure to try and stave a world war if it's at all possible at this point. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. A big thanks to you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, it's time for us to get to the second question of this segment.
Also, by the way, I want to give a special shout out here because I saw American Restoration say, please note that the two $50 donations from Tyler Weaver, both were from my daughter Aria, and can you please say her name? She's up past bedtime. And also a big shout out to Aria, by the way, and a big shout out to you as well, American Restoration, for that massive donation right there. And we do appreciate that a bunch. And a big shout out to Aria, by the way. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I gotta give a big shout out to Aria. A big shout out to y'all for the support and supporting this fundraiser, because y'all have actually gotten it up to a whopping $2,900. That is a huge amount, and I got to thank y'all so much because y'all are doing your effort and your part in helping to support American and Western interests around the globe and making sure that our allies stay on top while our enemies stay below, hopefully. And so a big shout out to y'all, and a big shout out to Aria once again, who's staying up past her bedtime. Go to bed, you. But beyond that, it is time for us to get on to the second question of this segment.
And this one goes to Knox Date, who said, in your guys' opinion and how things are escalating in record speed, could we see World War III by the end of this year or later on in 2026 in Europe?
I would say that that's actually pretty likely, actually, at this point, especially if things keep escalating the way that it is. It's definitely certain, I would say, because the Russians are going absolutely insane because their economy is collapsing right under them, and that gives them a very limited time to act before their country collapses due to the economic situation. So it is most likely going to be coming around. I don't really know when. Crystal balling like that's really hard, but with the current military exercises going on right now, at this moment, they could kick off World War at any minute. So I hope that does address that the best I can. And I also saw someone say in the chat, Carl Edwards said, Enforcer, your stance is different today than yesterday. It's the same. It's just that there is a different a different angle being taken at it. So I'll explain really quickly. If the Russians are going to start a war, there is no point in burying our head in the sand and acting like it's not going to happen. But at the same time, that does not mean that we go out of our way to offensively strike the Russians and pretty much start World War III on our end, as far as the offensive action goes. This is the same statement I was making yesterday. As far as what's going on with the Russians, we should have our forces in position, ready to fight them, literally facing them down at this minute, so that way, if they start a war, we're already there and ready to go. That's what I was saying yesterday, and that's generally what I'm saying today. However, that does not mean that we go all the way to the point. I think this is where a lot of people misunderstand this. Posturing is different than acting. Posturing is just getting ready to do something if they do something defensively on our end. What some people take it as is me saying, let's go ahead and bomb them. And then the people call me a warmonger because they're misunderstanding my statement. And I'm not one for war. I generally would love to avoid a war. But the way that we avoid a war is we prepare for war, and we make it incredibly clear that if the Russians bring us a war, we're going to end the war that they started on our terms, not theirs. That's kind of what a lot of people don't understand, is that building up a conventional force as a deterrent and as a threat to them is not the same thing as saying, let's just start carpet bombing them and drone strike the Kremlin and get Putin tomorrow. That's two totally different different things. So it's the same thing being said. It's just a different approach being taken to it, because when people say, like the president, it's Europe's fault that the war keeps going, and then I go, it's not, and as a matter of fact, we should be far more aggressive and face the Russians down and pretty much threaten them with an inch of their lives as the United States, that if they do take an action that brings us into war, we are going to absolutely curb stomp them on the battlefield. That's the angle that was taken yesterday. The angle taken today is someone asking, should we just go ahead and bomb the Russians? And my answer to that is absolutely no, because that's starting a war that we could possibly try to avoid, although in my opinion it's unlikely. But if there is still a chance, we don't want to go ahead and just recklessly enter it. We want to try and see if we can build up our forces and threaten them enough that they'll just back off and we won't go into a third world war. So I hope that kind of addresses the nuance in that somewhat well, because it is the same statement, it's just different approaches and angles being taken to get to the same result. But anyways, with that, we are on to the last question of the segment, and then we're going to be getting on into the rest of the news.
And our last one here goes to Darter, who said, would the enforcer team support a blockade of Kaliningrad? And I would say we got to be very careful with that one, Darter. In the past, I have said that they should consider strongly closing off the routes, the train routes from Russia into Kaliningrad. But that's a very big step to take, because that is going to be viewed as a very strong provocation to the Russians if NATO were to do that. So we got to be careful with that. Now, at the same time, though, we also have to be careful not to be too lax with the Russians, because they could be literally training in weapons right into Kaliningrad through those trains. So I would say a blockade of Kaliningrad is probably not the wisest idea right now, because, of course, we could simply tell them, look, the trains have got to stop while the pod's going on. But, of course, they still could use vessels to take stuff to Kaliningrad. The Russians could. So a full blockade, I would say probably not the best idea right now. But, Enforcer, what say you?
A full blockade would be an act of war. Blockading a port or any sort of a port of access or a port of entry of any type is generally considered an action of war. So I would generally say we shouldn't, and that's why we kind of have to tiptoe around that as well. We should definitely make it clear that we will destroy the forces in Kaliningrad and take Kaliningrad within days or weeks of the opening of a war, but at the same time, we do not want to put ourselves into a situation where we start the war. So I would say that the blockade would not be the wisest move at the moment. But one thing I would say, however, is that we do need to make sure that we are trying to prepare as much provisions as possible for the Lithuanians to be able to inspect every single Russian train and truck that is traveling through their country at the moment into Kaliningrad, to make sure that they're not trying to prepare some sort of a military provocation or an armed invasion of the Suwalki Gap. And if they are, we'll be able to catch it, because the Lithuanians will be inspecting every single train and truck that passes through. So I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. And so with that, we are on into the rest of the news. Also, I see a lot of people continuing to talk about the situation with what's going on and saying we are in a third world war. And in a sense, I would say that we're pretty much in a hybrid third world war. It almost is a full-blown war at the moment because of the Russian drone incursions. I did say that yesterday. I would agree with that again today. But once again, folks, there is a little bit of nuance that goes on with that, and people have to understand, because we are pretty much on the very verge of World War III right now, it doesn't mean that we want to go, okay, well, it's going to happen, let's do it, because then we could end up getting ourselves into a third world war that may have somehow been a small percentage chance avoidable. In the Cuban Missile Crisis, something that a lot of people wouldn't know is that the U.S. Navy actually depth charged a Russian submarine, a Soviet submarine, off of the coast of Cuba and forced it to surface. And technically that was a warlike action. At that moment, we had taken direct armed action that could have destroyed that Soviet submarine and started World War III. And it was because everyone didn't just go, okay, let's start killing, that we avoided World War III, because the Soviets realized from that action, damn, America is serious, and this could end up in nuclear Armageddon. And so because we respect the strength of the Americans, and they are pretty much threatening to kill us at the moment, under Kennedy's administration, let's back off, and let's try and find a compromise, which is what we did. We found a compromise with them in the end. This is a similar situation. The drone incursions of today are a lot like the U.S.'s depth charging of the Soviet sub back then. And so while we are technically pretty much already at World War III, there is still, by the historical precedents, a slim chance that we can avoid it. So while we want to be ready for World War III, and we want to be ready to curb stomp the Russians on the battlefield if we go to war, we still want to be able to give the out to where this whole thing could de-escalate. That's the very fine sort of a tightrope approach that we have to take, and historically we have always taken, and usually it's turned out pretty well. So anyways, With that, it is time for us to move on into the rest of the news. Moving on up into the area of Prime Orcs, we were able to see that the city was dealing with the little situation at Prime Orcs Port. We can see them cleaning up some of the damage from the attacks at the beach. That's the end of that clip. Very interesting to see, however. And moving further on down and into the area of Leningrad, we were able to see a little train derailment. Well, you know, folks, it's crazy. I stopped talking about trains, and trains find us. Isn't that crazy, Matthew? Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy right there, and it's just totally flipped over. It's not the right way up.
So from what we were able to hear, apparently a locomotive of 15 tank cars derailed, and we believe that it may have been some sort of sabotage, possibly that was conducted by pro-Ukrainian forces. We're not really sure, but it was quite a significant derailment, and somehow the entire multiple unit ended up on its side, which is rare.
Was it carrying birds?
Maybe? Like, maybe. That is
Annoying.
annoying.
You're getting fried.
There's someone just walking down the tracks.
It looked like they're just defeated. Like that was their train, like their personal train or something.
Man, they're walking down the tracks like, oh, like, here's some pictures. We can see, oh, the damage was quite significant. Look at that. Oh, buddy, that's quite a decent amount of damage that was caused to that locomotive. And we can also see, it's bad down here. It's pretty rough. And, oh, look at that. Oh, my goodness, folks. It's Russian East Palestine. The tank cars went right into the water, like, right into the stream, right next to the tracks. And it looks like they're also
It's a terrible tragedy. They said they need to clean it up fast. They said, get this out of the water. They can't have that polluting the streams and the rivers. Those fish, they're not going to be breathing in the oil. They said the fish don't like oil. So they said, sir, they make sure you feed fish kibble, not oil. They don't like it. It doesn't go in the gills. It doesn't do it.
Some people said that fish like oil. Some people said that fish oil's good. So what we did is that we did the fish a straight solid. Instead of them having to make the oil, we poured the oil right into the stream. Fish oil is what they call it. They swim through it. They get coated in it. And then Don gets to make another amazing ad where they clean the shit off of a bird or a fish or something. Really cool ads. I thought they were really nice. And they really tug at the heartstrings. Look at that cute little ducky getting bathed of all the oil with Don dish soap. Great stuff. We're not even sponsored by them, but what the hell? It's great stuff. But look at it. Look at the damage. These oil tank cars, they are flooding across the tracks. We don't even know if they're good tank cars. Some people said they didn't pass the Federal Railroad Administration safety tests, but what will we know? We kind of defunded them. But look at that. All the axles just spread out across the tracks. The concrete ties couldn't even hold the rails. I guess you could say they got railroaded. Really terrible stuff. And this engine.
Russia really does not care about the environment. Between the oil spills they're having, the trains derailing and dumping stuff on the ground. I mean, Russia's just destroying their environment.
They're destroying the environment, and I said drill, baby, drill, but I didn't mean like this. They are drilling trains straight into the freaking ground, pouring oil into the streams. Some people say it's really rough in Russia, really rough. I've actually heard from Keith Kellogg, like the cereal company, Kellogg, they make great cereals. But I was told by him that Russia isn't winning, and I gotta be honest with y'all, I think they're losing so badly, they're tired of losing. Look at this shit, look at it. They got the axles on the ground, locomotive turned over. It sounds like the beginning of some kind of a raunchy-ass song by Fergie, but it's not. It's a train derailment. Really terrible stuff. You don't see it often, but moving on from that, we also were able to hear just a couple of miles off to the east, near to the area of Kurishi, a pretty significant refinery fire is still ongoing there. Look at that.
Oh, wow. Kurishi is getting hit hard. I think this is like the second or third largest refinery in Russia, isn't it?
I think so, yes.
That's a big boy there. Losing a lot of oil production, I'm telling you.
Oh, quite a large amount, I'd have to say. Oh, and
that's that chemical factory.
Yeah, that's the chemical factory in the Urals. I was looking at that. I was so confused I didn't even say anything. I was like, what the hell is that? Anyways, moving on from those clips, it's time for us to get on down into the area of Krasnodar. Krasnodar has been under so many drone attacks, they're now setting up the anti-drone nets over the highways in and out of the city. Oh, womp womp. That's what I say. But look at these. Look, they go on for miles. They go on for endless amounts of miles, tons and tons of nets. I mean, that's so many nets, you might actually be able to give Chris's mom fish nets. But anyways, on in Theodosia, we also get to see a significant fire burning here. Take a little gander at this one. Oh, it's a forest fire, by the way. It's not from a Ukrainian attack, weirdly enough.
Like I said, they hate the environment.
You know, the Russians and the environment, they just don't mix. It's like oil and water. They don't mix either. And the Russians, I think, are learning about that in, like, hands-on science classes out there in Leningrad right now. They're like, see how the oil, like, slicks over the top of the water? It does not mix. It's like, wow, that's crazy. Anyways, we're going to be moving on into the Ukrainian front lines. As we were able to hear, the Ukrainians are continuing to retake more ground in the Sumy direction. They have completely liberated Kiev-Shrativka, and now they're moving on to Konstantinivka, right along the border. And Oleksivka over here to the east. They're making gains. And speaking of gains, Swolensky was able to show us today that Russia's refining their kamikaze drones, at least to some extent. The fiber optic drones are now expected to be able to reach 20 kilometers. And a lot of y'all are going to look at this ugly abomination and go, how in the world is this an improvement? They've made it a little bit lighter. And because it's lighter, it is able to get a little bit more range. So that's the way that they're improving these things. Does it look better? It looks worse, but it is apparently an improvement. We also were able to see in our location unknowns a pretty sick-looking Badana that was covered in a pretty sizable cope cage. But although it is covered in a cope cage, it did look pretty cool.
It does look pretty cool.
Honestly, it looks baller. We also got to hear the Russian casualty report for the past 24 hours, and it was bigly! Miss Disa, keeper of the record, stated that 29 days and counting under 1,000, and another middling day. And middling indeed, but middling isn't too bad, folks. You know what I always said? You'll keep meddling so much you'll get tired of middling. And according to the casualty report over the past 24 hours, we were able to hear that 880 Russian soldiers were wounded and killed, along with 102 supply trucks, 3 main battle tanks, 42 artillery pieces, 261 drones, 1 MLRS, and that was it. It was a pretty decent day, nonetheless, but still great to see. Moving on out of those areas and on towards Vovchansk, we also get to see the Ukrainian drone forces doing their work on the Russian logistics near to the Vovchansk city area. The Russians are running logistics into Vovchansk City. Hey! You can build the FPV and run it into a Badana. Bam!
Oh, they saw this thing waiting on him, too. That was one of those waiting drones that the Russian has, or the Ukrainians have. They have them, like, sitting on the side of the road, just sort of, like, waiting the whole time. Then they just suddenly take off. That time, the Russians actually spotted it.
Yeah, they actually did, man. They were like, oh my god, Baba Yaga, like, get out! They stopped the truck. Get out, Blad, it's taking off! Oh, Blad! And then, bam, right on the Badana. And that thing's
cooked. They should see it with that wide windshield they got on the front of that Scooby-Doo van. That you can see everything from that.
Like, zoink, Scoop, it's coming right for us! Ruh-roh, Raggy! Kaboom! And then it like, hits right into that windshield.
Zoinks?
Here we can see the Ukrainian FPVs targeting and destroying Badanas. Badanas are some of the worst-looking trucks ever made in the world. Similar to that of the Scooby-Doo van, these horrendous creatures roam around the fields of Ukraine like a swarm of locusts. However, the Ukrainians have decided to feast upon the numerous Badana and destroy it before it could become an invasive species. But nevertheless, moving on out of the Vovchansk area, and further on down the line, we also were able to see near the area of the city of Lyman, more Russian logistics getting wiped out by the Signum unit.
Well, they were whipping this thing.
I guess you could say that they were whipping it like a Chad. Matthew, hit us with that Sigma Alpha music.
Man, I wish I could imitate it. I just can't. I can't. Imitating music, that's above my pay grade right there.
What
but you know
color
what's
is
not
your
above my pay grade? You know what's not above my pay grade? When you see a wild Russian walking down the street, you got to make sure that you watch your back, because it could be trouble, especially when they're here on the front lines.
I gotta be honest with you, that voice gets me every time. He does it so well. I actually feel like I'm talking to that guy. It's really weird.
Don't dare accuse me of getting you. I'm not. Don't accuse me of something like that. I'm gonna go get some. Anyway.
He will now tell us the story about how he butchered a barracuda on a deep-sea fishing expedition and dropped it off at Mount Rushmore.
Not a barracuda. It was a deep sea anglerfish. Get it right.
I was mistaken. Moving on
Thank you.
into Severodonetsk. We're losing it tonight. I don't know why. But moving on into Severodonetsk, we also got to see the Ukrainians did hit an ammunition depot inside of Severodonetsk. Let's see how big it was. Doesn't look that big. I was mistaken. I was very much mistaken. That
Remember
looks...
to take cover, kids. Don't stand in the street. It's not good for your health. They tell you that when you see something going off down the street, you got to go in and get behind cover.
Here we can see RFK giving advice on how to do in an ammunition explosion. But, as we can see, the Russians, which are attracted to open fires like moths to a flame, started to gather around the ammunition depot, hoping to find and explore the contents of the burning depot. But alas, they will now go through a ritualistic practice of their species, which is called getting knocked on their ass by a large explosion. As you can see here, they all gather around, awaiting this ritual-like event. And thus, they have all been knocked on their asses immediately. They are now christened as real Russians, or as they call them in Russian, suka blia pistek iti nahuy pistek. But anyways,
I don't know what you're saying, and you better stop it. But all I know is this: one knocking from a bang down the street, it can cause you to lose at least one brain cell if you're not careful.
I have to ask you a question, sir. Should we eat raw meat?
Well, it's a tricky question. I would like to go further with this impersonation, but I can't, because if I say something too crazy, like this fella might say, YouTube might restrict the video, and I can't do it.
You know something? You ought to just sit you down. But anyways, moving on. Here's the ammunition explosion later on in the day after the first explosion we saw just a second ago.
Also, folks, do not eat raw meat. Please do not eat raw meat. I repeat, raw meat, cook it first, then eat it.
Do not eat raw meat. You will get worms. Like, it is a guarantee.
Maybe that's the point.
I do as the worm
It all
commands.
stems back to the worm. And the worm wants something. I knew the whole time. I said somebody's got an ulterior motive here. And I said, I think it might be that worm. I don't think he left. I think he's still here.
Honestly, that's deep. About this, like, I'll just stop the joke there. But anyways, we can see the K2 slamming some Russians near the Seversk area. Well, a myriad of targets, tanks, personnel, you know. Oh, it's all on and on and on. Honestly, so much I can't even really tell y'all exactly which one is. But anyways. Anyway, look, Jack. I'm sitting here looking at them, and you see them with your eyes. Eye doctors, eyeball exams, Costco. Anyways. Well, that's
the worm compels us. It compels us all.
Amen. Blessed be the worm. But moving on.
Say it louder. It makes the worm very happy.
Wait, hold up, man. I thought what made the worm happy was like Mongolian throat singing. You know that meme, like the one that had like the worm and it was like, you know, raise the temperature that meat can be stored at, and had like that Mongolian throat singing song behind it and showed like the worm.
Oh yeah,
bro, like that meme was fire. Honestly, that was a funny one. But anyways. We can see here the 36th Brigade in the area of Konstantinivka getting some Russians off of their ATVs and exercising.
Exercise is good.
Also, folks, I know that a lot of our old-timers love the voices, but y'all would not believe it. We have been hemorrhaging viewership since we started. Like, no joke.
Hemorrhaging is bad. You might want to see a doctor.
Some people have said, we'll start hemorrhaging so many viewers you'll get tired of hemorrhaging. And it's honestly true. But I like the voices are fun.
Does the problem lie with us, or is it the people that we're imitating? Which one is it, folks? What's driving people away? Something is causing the people to leave.
You know what?
I don't think the worm controls everybody. The worm's not telling people to leave. So which one is it? I don't know.
You know what? We should be like every single major multi-billion-dollar media company out there, and instead of the problem being us, we blame our fans. That's what we should do. That'll definitely keep everyone around.
Man, I'll tell you, that's deep.
That's deep. Like, that's literally every company. Someone can say, hey, that movie kind of sucked. And then they'll say something like, I don't know, their fans or their audience is like bigots or something like that, just pissing people off. Like, they'll just go off at them. Like, someone will say, I don't really think that story was true to the original source material. And they'll be like, you bastard. Like, and then it's like, okay, that's a way to keep people around, I guess. I don't know. But anyways, with that, we are going to be moving on out of that area of the front at Bilorivka and moving on down into the area of Pokrovsk, where we also got to see the Russians driving down a little bit of the highway of death.
Oh, I'm gonna reel back the voices. By the way, I think I'm driven some people crazy with that one particular voice right there. So yeah, this is terrible though for those Russians. I tell you what.
I mean, this is like a junkyard, really, like where you can get some spare parts. Man, you know something.
That's the end of the video.
Yeah, that was crazy. Kind of abrupt, really. Like, I didn't expect it. Anyways, we also get to see this MiG-29 firing off some hammers. Take a look. So quiet and peaceful. What?
Who said that?
Did somebody order a pizza? Like, what the hell? Well, there goes the hammers,
I thought it was
anyways.
somebody at the door or something. I was like, who the hell's out there?
Honestly, I kind of could go for a pizza. I'm pretty hungry. Oh, and they're the rocket-assisted hammers. Sick! I love the rocket-assisted hammers. Those are the real AASM 250 hammers, which I should have known that they were the rocket-guided ones, because they're the only ones that are the AASM variety of the hammer. But moving on into the southern front, we also got to see near the Polohi a Russian assault being repelled by the 65th Ronin.
The Ronin Brigade. They always have that armor on them.
So I was like, goodness, you weren't lying. No, we weren't, because when we first started the voices, we were at 14.5 thousand people. Now we are 12.7. That's why, folks, we don't really do the voices too much, because like, while a lot of people absolutely love them and they think they're hilarious, there's an equal number of people who absolutely hate them. So that's why we kind of keep them very limited and usually keep them to the question segment for the longtime viewers, because we want to make sure to try and make the show as enjoyable as possible for everyone and not run people off. And when you see them here, bringing the drone on down, right on top of the Russians. And someone said, why are you barking like rabid dogs? Unsubscribed. Well, I could ask your mother. Like, but anyways, we can see here the vehicles in the field, of course, cooking nicely.
Someone said, why does that dude always sound like that anyways? I think it's a legit thing. Like, he's definitely not doing that on purpose. That's for certain. So yeah, I think it's just a thing.
I would say so. I think it is. And they were just cooking it down there. You know, folks, back in the day, people used to beef with us here on YouTube because we did the voices a lot. Kind of a little crazy thing. Like actual YouTubers would beef with us over that. But the Ronin is absolutely hitting the Russians. Look at him.
Smacking them left and right, honestly.
Man, they smacked them left and right. You know, I gotta stop doing the voices. Like, I got in a roll tonight, and I want to keep doing them, but we're gonna stop. We're gonna stop them right here. The buck stops here.
Oh, and they got him good. They hit some car right there at the very end. They hit something.
Oh, they hit something all right. It was something nice. But moving on up into Kyiv, it's time for us to get the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on this very day of the war. You know what, folks? Let me go check something really quickly, because when I put this up earlier, it looked like there was a speech from today, because it said the 14th of September. Now it's not. So let me go and check this really quickly. Very quickly, I say, if I may add, I may insist, because I have to make sure that we do have one, because if not, we're moving. There was one. I'm not going crazy, Matthew. It's here on his YouTube channel. It was on the website earlier, and then they removed it for some reason. I don't know why, but anyways.
He must have said something he wasn't allowed to say or something like that. The deep state came in and got it.
He said, "What's up, bitches?" Like, and then they're like, take that one down. Like, take it down. But anyways, without further ado, here is the speech. Speech!
Speech!
Здоров'я, шановні українці, українки. хочу сьогодні особливо подякувати усім нашим воїнам, які завдають Росії дійсно значимих втрат на фронті, втрат при кордоні, втрат на власній території Росії завдяки нашим далекобійним ударам. Найбільш ефективні санкції, які діють найшвидше – це вогонь на російських нафтових заводах, на їхніх терміналах, нафтобазах. Суттєво обмежили російську нафтову галузь. І це суттєво обмежує війну. Російська війна – це фактично функція нафти, функція газу, усіх інших російських енергоресурсів. Дякую спецпризначенцям Служби безпеки України, які днями дуже якісно відпрацювали по Приморську. Найбільший нафтовий термінал Росії на Балтійському морі. Є суттєві пошкодження, все перевірено. І це відчутно для ворога. Наші спецпризначенці тримають в полі зору також порт Усть-Луга та всі інші російські точки виходу на світовий ринок. Зараз безпілотники Служби безпеки України здатні діяти на відстані більш 1000 кілометрів. Працюють також сили спеціальних операцій, сили безпілотних систем, служба зовнішньої розвідки ГУР. Дякую всім за влучність. Коли є результат, відзначаємо результат. Росія давно могла би припинити цю війну. І ми це пропонували. Партнери пропонували. Багато разів. На все, що стосується миру, у Росії відмова. Відповідно, ми захищаємось. І важливо, що постійно розширюємо лінійку засобів ураження, які ми виробляємо та застосовуємо. Звісно, деталі дуже чутливі. Але я хочу подякувати також кожній українській компанії, які забезпечують для нас цю силу. Називати компанії не будемо поки що. Вони і так знають, хто застосує яку зброю. Важливо, що такі компанії у нас є. Важливо, що збільшують обсяги. Важливо, що ми на рівні держави підтримуємо кожен саме такий бізнес, який зміцнює українську обороноздатність та повертає нам справедливість. Також хочу відзначити виробників наших дронів, особливо дронів-перехоплювачів. Ми збільшуємо обсяги і принципово, що розвиток таких дронів не зупиняється. Технологічна війна вимагає постійних змін. Я дякую всім інженерам, розробникам, кожному підприємству, всім, хто допомагає, кожному нашому волонтеру, усім, хто підтримує нашу оборону на належному технологічному рівні. Захист України – це дійсно спільне завдання. Ми готові навчити такому захисту всіх партнерів. Всі бачать, що росіяни розвідують, як винести війну на територію Польщі, Балтійських держав. Російська армія випробовує Румунію. Звісно, у НАТО є Петріоти, інші системи та сильні винищувачі, але проти російських шахедів та гербер ми в Україні маємо значно дешевші, більш масовані та системні рішення. Важливо, щоб не втрачався час. Була доповідь головкома сьогодні, головкома Олександра Сирського. Є хороші результати в прикордонні Сумщини. Наші підрозділи продовжують просуватися в бік державного кордону України. Дякую воїнам 225-го окремого штурмового полку та 71-ї єгерської бригади. Також значні втрати у росіян і на Харківщині, в Куп'янську, на Донеччині. Продовжуємо діяти на Добропільському напрямку. Важливо, що російські штурми відбиваються хлопцями. Особлива вдячність воїнам 1-го, 225-го та 425-го окремих штурмових полків, 79-ї та 82-ї десантно-штурмових бригад. Молодці хлопці. Діємо відповідно ситуації і на Запоріжжі. Дякую всім, хто захищає нашу державу та людей. Дякую всім, хто з нами, хто з Україною. Слава Україні!
Hiram Slava.
And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 1299 of our war news coverage. And it's time for us to move on into the second segment of this stream where we get to talk to all of y'all. And I gotta say, folks, it's one hell of a way to round out a show right now because we are at a whopping $3,165 raised out of a $2.5 thousand goal for Razom for Ukraine. It's really incredible, folks. It's really amazing. You know that voice that I did earlier, folks? You know, the one for the president? That one actually almost like blasted out the the left side of my neck. Like, it feels like it's just absolutely busted right now from that. So I'm going to have to take it a little bit easy tonight because I don't want to blow my vocal cords out from, like, you know, overexerting them. Because that one actually takes a lot of strain and effort. But anyways, with that, I'm going to be taking it a little bit easier on my voice by talking like this for the rest of the night. But we have another question that Enforcer Matt has asked all of y'all. And Matthew, what are you thinking about it? What is everyone else thinking about it as well?
All right, so it's time to get serious here. We got a very serious question right here in the poll. It says the U.S. Congress suggests that there is an appetite for sanctions against Russia, and will it finally happen? It looks like 45% said yes, sanctions are on the menu, while 31% said no, sanctions are off the menu, and 11% said it sounds like India and China might get replaced as the main entree of the night. And I would say personally that to me, there may be an appetite in the Congress for sanctions. But the problem is, though, is that Congress is going to do what they're told, as the old saying goes. And unless the order comes from the top that the U.S. president wants there to be sanctions put on Russia, then the Congress is not going to be able to get that done. So it basically all depends on the president. So far, the president appears not to really have an appetite for sanctions against Russia. He keeps claiming he does, but he keeps stalling at the same time. So I'm really not hopeful about direct sanctions on Russia right now. There are still secondary sanctions that could be put on the Russian Federation. And right now, we're hearing some senators say that Vladimir Putin cares so little about sanctions that it's pointless. And my argument would be, well, if Vladimir cares so little about sanctions, let's slap some on him and see what happens. So I'm going to say I'm with the 46%. I think sanctions are not going to happen until the big fella says yes. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that it's probably going to take a while, and I would have to be with the 31%. I don't think sanctions are going to happen. The president of the United States is waffling so much, he would shoot that down if it ever came around to being in his wheelhouse. He'd probably veto it. And on top of that, the Congress will only try and work on something if they don't think it will be vetoed. There's a huge amount of support for it in the Congress, not in the office of the president. And for that reason, they most likely will not try and push forward with it. One other thing as well is that the mental gymnastics being done by some members of the Congress to try and justify the waffling is unreal, as Matthew did touch on it a second ago, and he was talking about the specific, I believe it is a senator, that was saying that, well, the sanctions aren't even going to have any impact on the Russians, and Matthew and me were both agreeing in this earlier. It's like, well, if they're going to have no impact, why not just implement them anyways? Because if Putin isn't going to care about them, what harm is there in doing it? At least we did it to say that we did it. The truth of the matter is that it will have an impact, and that's why we're scared to do it. So with that, I hope that addresses that well, at least in my opinion as well, but I largely have to agree with Enforcer Matt on that. And so with that, it's time for us to get on into those cool questions. I have a stammer. I'm just kidding, folks. I don't have a stammer. But anyways, what do we got, Matthew?
I also like how they phrase it too, like they have an appetite for the sanctions. It's like, well, why the word appetite? Like, why is that coming into play here? It's like an appetite for. It's like, what, are we going to eat the sanctions?
It's because
you know, I don't.
It's because they're all getting wine and dined by so many lobbyists they can't get anything separated from a meal. Like they're like, we have an appetite for it. I'm just kidding, by the way, folks. I'm just kidding.
Like,
no one's getting lobbied that badly up there. I mean, that'd be insane, right?
We're going to start using food terms for everything now, apparently, in this country. We're going to start describing everything with, oh, we have an appetite for it. Oh, that's just the appetizer right there. No, that's the main course there. That's what that is. So I guess food terms are what we're going with now. I guess we're going to throw a Twinkie over there to get to North Korea. We're going to get them on the same page at this point. But anyways, jumping into our questions here, actually jumping into our top donors. We've had some more since the last time we called them out. A big shout out to Captain Ed, who put in, or Captain Ted, actually, who put in a $100 $100 donation. A huge shout out to you, good sir, for that massive support of the fundraiser. Also, a big shout out to Greg Carrier and Catherine Mosley for each putting in a 50 as well. And a big shout out to all three of y'all for that generous support right there. And we're currently sitting at $3,200 raised, which is well above the goal right now. So tremendous to see that. And a big shout out to everybody once again. But it is now time to jump into our Morse code decoders of the stream. And tonight we had Paul Schultz, Kevin J, Mason Miami, Joni Dog, Norm Pritchett, Arabo Garbo, Earl Fluffness, Kush, Kopioteryx, and Sire. They said the Morse code says Ukraine is keeping Russia's streets clean of cars, money, and just about everything else in LLT LSA.
And that's the sound of money. Y'all got that down on the nail. That is the Morse code message of the night. I got to congratulate the Lady Springer Cinema Corps for getting that correct on the 1,299th day of the war once again. Y'all are always getting it correct, and it's truly an incredible and amazing thing. I gotta say, a massive congratulations to y'all. And so with that, it is time for us to get on into, interestingly enough, a super chat, I believe. I think we have 2 super chats. We'll get those 2 super chats, and then we'll move on into the live chat questions. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so speaking in food terms here, we are moving on to the second appetizer, and we have here a bone that has been thrown to us by Patrick Coyle. Thank you very much, good sir, for that succulent tenderloin. We appreciate that. And Patrick put in a 20 on his first one here. He said, if a draft for World War III were implemented and your numbers got called in the lottery system, would both of you go out and fight? Oh, and yeah, absolutely. If the draft was done, that's a legal order. So yes, I would definitely go out and fight. He said, what would happen to the Enforcer channel, and what front would you choose? Indo-PACOM, Eurocom, CENTCOM? And Patrick, here's the thing. It would all depend on the commander. I'll be totally honest with y'all. I would actually request permission to be able to film it using a GoPro and ask permission if OPSEC wasn't an issue to be able to upload that. Now, to some people that might sound morbid, but I think it's important to show what's going on in the battlefield scenario. And if we were in Ukraine, we'd be showing that, but we're not obviously Ukrainian and we live in the United States. So we don't go all the way to Ukraine to film that. But I would actually request permission to do that. But for me, though, I am 25 years old currently, and I'm about to be 26 next year. So if a draft is called, I'm going to be one of the very last people actually called up in a draft. The Enforcer would actually go first, but he possibly is disqualified maybe. I'm not really sure what the whole situation with that is, but I think he might be possibly disqualified from being in the draft because of a condition. So what front would I choose personally? I would say probably Eurocom, actually, for me. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that, of course, I would answer the call of the president, because you get this cute little letter in the mail when they draft you. It says, the president needs you, pretty much. And so I would, of course, answer the call of our great president of the United States of America, elected by the citizens of the Republic, and immediately join the armed forces if I make it through the medical qualifications. To put it in short, although I don't think this is true, this is how the military looks at me. I'm a cripple because I have a scoliosis of a certain curvature in my spine that's just 1 degree enough that they call me a cripple, and technically that will most likely medically disqualify me from the first rounds of draft notices that came through. Later on, the Congress would change the draft requirements because they would need more men, so then they'd probably say, okay, cripples like you can join now, you're not a cripple anymore according to us, and I'd be like, yippee, I get to join. But I would, of course, join. It's the law, and on top of that, it's a civic duty that one must have to serve their nation if called on. And also, which front would I fight on? Whichever one the military sends me to. My drill instructors will love me. it's like, whichever one they tell me, I'm going to. If it's the Marines, you're definitely going to the Pacific. If you're in the Army, you're definitely going either to CENTCOM or EUCOM. If you're in the Air Force, you could end up anywhere. And if you're in the Navy, well, you get to see the world. All 75% of it that's covered in water, which is really cool. So really, to be honest with you, I would be fine really going anywhere. I don't have any preference. Well, really, I have one preference as long as I'm not fighting in the Middle East, because the Middle East is pretty barbaric when you end up getting caught as a prisoner if you ever do. So that's the one place I really wouldn't want to go, but beyond that, Indo-PACOM or EUCOM, I'm fine with. So with that, I hope that does address it the best I can. And also, speaking, folks, of appetite and whining and dining, since we're a little bit hungry, I thought, Matthew, we would look around the fine eateries of Washington, D.C. just for a brief moment and see what type of appetite we can build up here, because,
Are you about to check out Freddy's Bar or something?
Freddy's Bar?
You don't know?
Oh, I do know. It just clicked.
You know, that's
Like,
part that's part of the pizza index right there. They say they look at Freddy's Bar, they look at the Domino's, and they look at the Pizza Hut. And that tells you a lot. If Freddy's Bar is indicating some certain patronage, then there might be something going on at the Pentagon.
oh my goodness, Matthew, look, it's the Museum of Illusions. Like, people in this country having a choice. I'm just kidding, by the way, folks. That was a funny one, though. You know, like, all things aside, that was a pretty good one. But look, wow, that's crazy. A Museum of Illusions. That looks like something in the
These kids
background.
these days, these kids are just goofing off like upside down on the subway like that. Like, come on.
I mean, look at this. I mean, the lawlessness in New York City. They don't even follow the laws of gravity anymore, these people. They need to get the National Guard. Like, they need to get the National Guard up there. Bring back the law of gravity, damn it. But let's see. Man. That's an interesting museum, though, I will admit. But what about the food? What's the Yard House?
Yard House, man, that's an expensive restaurant there, man. That's like
Ooh.
world known.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. Everybody talks about going to Yard House. It's like that's like going to like we'll see what's another one like a famous steakhouse or something. I don't know steakhouses. I don't go to them. So yeah, it's just like well known.
Wow, they said, give me the beer, but in a tall glass.
That's the Pentagon special.
Man, that's that tall. You know, if they filled this thing with water, they could say that it's a tall glass of water, like all of those Chinese honey traps wandering around Washington D.C. right now. Like it's like wow.
They named this drink right here the Secretary of War special right here. They said, "Give me your finest Secretary of War and the biggest glass you got."
Man, they pulled this one out specifically for the Secretary of Defense. They have this one just for him. They only pull it out when he shows up. But let's see here. The food looks great here, by the way. This actually does look really good. Let's see. What about founding farmers and distillers? Everyone's got to have their booze license, you know. What is that?
You know, that's how the restaurants make their money. They make most of their money off of alcohol sales. They got the biggest margins.
Oh, I know. Yeah, that's why they all have to have that little sidebar, you know, because that's where the real money's made. Let's see here. Busboys and poets. These are all of the aides and assistant interns to everyone in the Congress. This is where they all hang out. But the food looks pretty decent here too. Honestly, the food in Washington looks great. It kind of makes me want to go up there and have a little bite here and there. But the National Building Museum. Wow! I've never heard of this thing. Look at this.
I've been trying to tell you, man, about this National Building Museum. This place right here is something else.
They have a
what the hell is that? The Kremlin?
No, that's London St. Pancras Station.
Oh, Pancreas.
Not pancreas, it's St. Pancras. Totally different thing. Like, lawn.
Get off my lawn and pay your HOA dues on time.
You know, I have no problem with certain kinds of marriages. You know, let a thousand blossoms bloom. But what I am concerned about is that every 3 months, like, someone gets eaten alive by a crocodile in the outback. But anyways.
Oh, you're talking about that guy. Yeah. That guy's unhinged. That guy's really unhinged in Australia.
Dude, he's like all over the place, really. National Law Enforcement Museum. What is... Bro, they have a model of a prison. Like, it's no way. And they have a Indiana State Police trooper car. This actually looks like an old museum. They have way more museums here than I actually knew about. RoboCop.
Oh, look, they put him in there too?
No way. Also, I like how they made specific little big toes on RoboCop. Like, every other toe is just one giant toe, but then you have the big toe, completely separate from the rest, because it is the superior toe. You know, folks, if you actually got your big toes cut off, you wouldn't be able to keep your balance. Your big toes are really important in keeping your balance while standing. The more you know.
I'll keep that in mind if anybody tries to, you know, do any cutting. I'll have to, like, tell them, hey, they save that one now. Don't take that one.
We actually know someone, Matthew, who would know a lot about that.
We sure do.
We sure do. We won't name them on air, but that's actually really cool that they have an exhibit for that. But still, really neat stuff. What else do they have?
I'm just saying, but most of that stuff right there can be seen if you simply just drive down your local street. There's like police everywhere, so you can kind of see that like today without having to go to the museum in DC.
only in the South. Only in the South. There's
On
like
the
a
South,
cop
you see
on.
police everywhere.
There's a cop on every block. Literally, no joke. There's like a cop on every block in the South. Let's see. Restaurants around the White House. They have this one. Oh, that's the Cheesecake Factory. Joe's Seafood, Prime Steak, and Stone Crab.
Oh, this is where they take people right here when they need something done for them. They take them right here and they give them that little crab. I tell you what, that lobster, they give them it all. This is where you take somebody right here when you need a little political favor being called in right here. Look at that steak right there. They made it rare too, just like that little contribution, a little bit rare.
Man, when John Bolton comes to the restaurant, they say, "How would you like your steak cooked?" He said, "I want it bleeding." Like it's like, man. Honestly,
I want that steak blasted.
I want it bombed and bleeding. But by the way, folks, I just want to make it clear, we're just making these jokes and jest about these folks. Like, honestly, they all have their place in the nation, but still, it's fun to make the jokes here and there. But the food looks great, though. Like, honestly, it looks wonderful. Look at that. I mean, that really, like, this has got to cost a lot of money, considering especially that it's in prime real estate, right near to the White House. Let's see.
Go over there to the front of the
Abbott.
White House. Yes, that's it right here. I was about to tell you this one. This one right here. We've actually eaten in this restaurant before. It was pretty good.
Yeah, it was really good. The inside's really neat, too. Funnily enough, folks, this is actually where Vanderbilt, the original Vanderbilt, I think his name was Cornelius Vanderbilt, actually got in a fight with a guy. Did you ever hear this story, Matthew, before? He got in a fist fight with someone in here.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, he got in a fist fight with a guy in here who disrespected his son who died in the Civil War, and so he beat his ass in this place. Like that's a little bit of history about it. But a lot of folks who are quite influential actually come and eat here at the old Abbott Grill. It's been here in the same place, pretty much in generally the same building, for quite a long time, well over 150 years. It was around during the Civil War, so pretty cool place. And it's really nice on the inside too, and the food's great. So if you ever come through here, make sure to try and eat in there. It's not incredibly expensive. It's like $20 to $30, which for a daily basis sort of a thing, that's pretty pricey. But if you're on a vacation, you splurge a little, so it's not too bad. Also, what's the La Grande Boucherie? How much was that? $100 plus.
Oh man, the Le Grand Boucherie. Take your wallet and stomp on it.
I like the building. The building's really nice, but
This place just screams, "Take your money."
man, the worm. It's the worm.
What the? Oh, okay, that's a lemon peel or something. I was about to say, bro, what in the world?
They call that one the RFK.
Oh.
The worms made me do it. But oh man.
Ooh. This looks like that food right here that won't really fill you up, but it tastes good, and you also will go broke trying to eat it. So it's like enjoy it while you can.
Oh yeah, is that creme brulee with caviar on top?
I think so. Also, Miss Deesa said your taxpayer dollars are spent here. Yes, they are. They are spent here. Seriously, folks, in D.C., they will take people to restaurants here. And sometimes there'll be individuals that come over from foreign nations that are foreign officials, and this is what's known as wining and dining. You get to go all these little fancy, nice restaurants right here, while they get to try to convince you and lobby you on certain issues. So a lot of the people, and probably the reason why they use the word appetite when they talk about sanctions, is because they've worked up a very swell appetite by the time they get done getting wined and dined here in the restaurants. So, yeah, this is good dollars being spent here.
I just saw another one, Matthew. Look at this beer right here with all this foam on the top. They call foam a head when they talk about beers. Did you know that, Matthew?
I did know that. Yeah.
So I actually heard, Matthew, that they have one in here at the La Grande Boucherie that is all head, and it's mostly air. It's not even really beer. They call that one the Attorney General. Man, maybe we need to pull these back a little bit.
That was crazy.
It is what it is. Like I'm just trying to make a couple of jokes, and maybe some people can get some laughs out of them. And also to be fair, I actually heard that they have a special. It's like the happy hour, but they call it. Let's see, how in the world do I make this one happen without it being too overt? Let's see. Damn, how in the world do I do? They have a special to where you can get a drinks package where you can just keep drinking, until you become forgetful of everything and you don't really know where you are or what you're doing or what you're even saying. They call that one the Joseph R special. I'm sure many of y'all can pick up what that's supposed to be, but I tried to make it a little bit less on the nose. But anyways, with that, enough of the jokes about the food. The food looks great though. I wish we could go up there and have a little. But anyways, it's time for us to get on into the rest of the questions for the night. So what other super chat do we have, Matthew? Because I understand that we may have one more, if I'm not mistaken.
It's now time to move on to our live chat questions proper. And our first one here is going to go to Chargy. And he said, is Venezuela basically the U.S. version of China basically flexing their muscle on Taiwan?
And let's see here. Let me find that question and make sure I can read it. Which one was that, Matthew? Which one was that?
Chargy said, is Venezuela basically the U.S. version of China flexing its power on Taiwan?
In a sense, kind of. Like, as far as how we're doing it, I would say yes. But as far as the actual connection between the two, it's a fairly different sort of a thing, but with how it's turning out, fairly similar. So I'd say, in a sense, yes. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Canada is Sovereign, who said, how has public opinion in Russia affected troop recruitment? And honestly, Canada Sovereign, I've actually heard rumors that there's a poll that apparently came out that shows that 66% of the Russians don't want to fight in the war anymore. But the problem with that is, here's my question. How did they get that poll? Because, in Russia, there's obviously a ton of censorship and nobody's allowed to speak their mind. And most people are scared to speak their mind because they know that Putin's going to come after them if he finds out about it. So I'm not sure how they got that information. I'm personally a little bit skeptical about that. But if you believe it or not, the Russians don't want to fight the war anymore, a majority of people. So that should tell us something. But at the same time, though, they don't really have a say in it. The people on the front lines don't really care if they like it or not. Putin said get up there, and if they don't want to get up there, then Putin's going to handle them. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that public opinion really hasn't changed recruitment much at all. And it really, like Matthew was saying, it's really hard to ascertain what public opinion is, because the last Radio Free Europe poll that came out showed that pretty much everyone was in support of the war, and that was from like 4 months ago. And then some other polls come out and they say that no one's in support of the war. And I really don't know how either of them are getting honest, actual statistics out of the country. So, I would say that it's really hard to ascertain what their opinion is. I would actually assume that they're well in support of the war because of the kind of culture that they live in, to a sense. And also, due to the fact that they kind of look at it as a gravy train, in a sense, at least for the Russian public, in joining the military and fighting in Ukraine. So I would say that it has really no effect on recruitment, at least from what I can tell. But anyways, with that, it's time for us to move on into the next one. Also, I see a lot of people making the jokes. Honestly, there are a lot of jokes that you could make about Washington, D.C., or really more so the kind of political scene that exists there, making them as neutral as possible. But I also want to make it clear, folks, that's not supposed to represent my political opinion. It's just that whenever there's low-hanging fruit to make a cheap joke like that's pretty funny, I like to take it here and there. Like, honestly, folks, I wish there was something different in America to where people actually had a bit of a funny bone with politics, because if that was the case, we could joke on everyone. Like Matthew and me make endless jokes about everyone in politics on both sides all the time off air. And we would do that on air if people had a sense of humor about it, but a lot of people take it way too seriously, to the point that if you make a joke about someone that they don't like, they love the joke, but once you make a joke about someone they like, then they hate you and want you dead. So, then we have to kind of balance that whole thing out. But we would do them if we could, because there are so many jokes that are just easy pickings with that sort of a deal, and they are pretty funny. But we never get to do them because half of everyone's going to be pissed off no matter which direction the joke goes. So anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Canadian Realist, who said, kick me if you have to. And I won't do that, Canadian Realist. I'm not going to kick anybody here. He said, but I have to wonder, without showing actual evidence, what crime has Venezuela actually committed against the United States? And the crime they've committed, a Canadian Realist, is not a crime like we're familiar with domestically here in the United States, but the crime they have committed is they have moved way, way too close to the Chinese sphere of influence. And in geopolitics, that's a major crime. That's a big mistake for Venezuela to do that. But Maduro doesn't have good sense. As you can tell, he doesn't appear to be a very smart individual by all of his actions. And usually dictators are not very smart. Usually they're pretty dumb. And Maduro definitely fits the mold for that. So that is the crime he has committed. And also, their country is involved in narco-terrorism. That's also a fact as well, but I don't think that's the primary reason for the interdiction in Venezuela. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that the crime that they've committed is the same one that Matthew said. He pretty much hit it dead on the nail. It's not an actual crime in a sense. It's more so of a foreign policy and strategic sort of a thing. But they've committed a grievous crime in that sense. So I hope that does address it the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, by the way, someone said, are you afraid of the Venezuela regime? We're not afraid of the Venezuela regime. I think the U.S. military could take that regime on pretty easily if we wanted to. Probably not the wisest thing to do right now at the moment, considering that World War III might break out in Europe. We don't want to get bogged down in Venezuela, but I think the U.S. could take them on pretty good. But the problem is, though, we're not scared of Venezuela. Who we're scared of is China. And we don't want China to get a foothold there too much, because it looks like China's building oil rigs and also getting heavily entangled in the Venezuelan economy, more so than they were previously. So that's who we're afraid of. To make a comparison here, we weren't scared of Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. We were scared of the USSR. That was the problem. So it's a similar situation right now that we're having with Venezuela, and that's why we're taking it so seriously. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would pretty much agree. That's why we're taking the situation seriously with Venezuela. But really, I'll be honest, not really scared of any country out there in the world. We can deal with all of them. The only thing that makes some countries concerning is the nuclear weapons that they have, and that's what makes me say, we have to face the Russians down, but we certainly don't want to start a war with them. And also with China, that's why you kind of have to pansy around them a little bit, is because of our massive economic relations with them, and also the fact that they're nuclear armed, and they're also the largest military in the world outside of the Western sphere. But with the Venezuelans are not a scary country at all. Their GDP is incredibly small. Their military budget is non-existent. Their military is pretty much corrupt to the core. The government's corrupt to the core. So it'd be a pretty easy sort of a fish to fry. But the problem is that frying that fish could take some time. It's not a fast food restaurant here. This is fine dining. When we talk about a war, we have to have the good appetite for it and all, like we were joking about earlier. So is this really the right time to cook that fish? Considering that there's other fish that we are probably about to have to fry, whether we want or not, and we don't want all of the eyes on the stove taken up with the pan that we're using to fry this fish right now. That's kind of the situation that we're in with Venezuela, but not scared of them at all. Generally, what I would be more fearful about is the kind of creeping erosion that would happen with the Chinese and their grip on Venezuela if they were able to make a foothold there and keep it. And that's what's more concerning about them than anything. So with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, folks, we're actually getting hit with a solar storm right now. You might notice my Discord call here is not coming through perfectly well right now, but it looks like some pretty high activity right now. So that's going to affect the call, it looks like a little bit. The Enforcer will sound like Robo Enforcer for a solid second there, but hopefully I'm coming through decently loud and clear. But this one goes to JP, who puts in a $10 super chat right there. And thank you very much, JP, for that support. He said, at what point would the U.S. reinstate the draft?
In the absolute outbreak of a third world war, that's when the draft would come back. We never institute a draft before wars, usually. We usually institute them after a war has started. So I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Nuclear Logic, who said, would Russia use this as a justification for war against NATO? And I think they're referring to the Venezuela situation.
No, because it would be really hard for the Russians to make that kind of a stretch, because Venezuela is in the Americas, and Russia's involvement with Venezuela, while it's there, it's not really a huge one, so they wouldn't really be able to make an extremely large justification for it, nor would they be able to power project enough to actually help out the Venezuelans at all, so it would be a really bad justification, and one that they probably wouldn't want to explore, so I hope that does address that well, and with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to David Bailey. He said, Enforcer Matt, have you heard anything on the beginning of the construction of the Golden Dome? And I haven't really heard about the construction getting started. Have you heard about that, Enforcer?
Nah, me either. I haven't heard anything about it at all. After they announced it, it just went dead.
Yeah, I think they've allocated the money for it. I think I'm not even really clear on that. It seems like once they announced the Golden Dome, it seems like the hype kind of died down from it, and it's either sort of gone off into oblivion, like the idea of that system, or maybe they're working on procuring the funding. I'm not even really sure at what stage it's at right now. So I'll be honest, I got to actually declare ignorance on that one. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to declare ignorance on it too. We actually have no clue what's going on with the with Golden Dome currently. It's just kind of like disappeared off of the public radar at the moment. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Elphany, who said, would a high-altitude nuke as an EMP attack, would that be considered a nuclear attack, a traditional nuclear attack, and mutually destructive, or a return EMP attack instead?
Technically, if a nuclear weapon is flying at us, we do not know what it's doing, so we would just fire everything off back anyways. So really that would be considered a conventional nuclear attack, because if a nuclear weapon is flying towards us without any pre-warning or announcement, we are assuming that it's going to be an airburst over a city that's going to kill millions of people. So that's why we would fire back immediately. So I hope that addresses that the best I can. We would generally consider that a conventional nuclear attack, and we would just fire back a conventional nuclear attack in response. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Canada is Sovereign, who said, has China or Russia deployed any of their military near Venezuela as a deterrent to a potential U.S. attack?
No, and neither of them actually have the power projection capabilities to do such a thing in a prolonged situation, or for that matter, in any large number that would count. So I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Brian's Brains, who said, what is China and Russia even going to do or say if the U.S. Follows through and invades Venezuela?
They would give a strongly diplomatic worded condemnation, but that would be about it. I wouldn't expect them to do anything further than that, because when we bombed the Iranians, the Chinese had no response. They didn't even make a public response. And then the Russians just said, tisk, tisk, what a shame. Although they technically had a defensive alliance with Iran, to where if anyone attacked them, they would attack them back as the Russians, and they didn't, because they're scared of us. So they would give strongly diplomatic worded statements, and that would be it. So pretty much in a big sense, nothing. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one is going to go to Humble Learner, who said, could it be that we have the Venezuelan deployment in general, in case World War III does flare up, that the countries such as Cuba and Venezuela aren't launching attacks against the United States domestically?
It's possible, but their ability to conduct attacks on their own is incredibly limited, and Russia or China's ability to be able to try and supply Cuba or Venezuela with anything to be able to attack us with would never materialize, because the U.S. Navy could just stop that from happening. And considering that we would be in a state of war at that point with Russia and China under that hypothetical, any Chinese ships trying to make it into that area, we would quite truly just sink them before they could even get close. So I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a question from Thomas Malloy, and he has a question about Kaliningrad. He said, why wouldn't Russia connect their province above Poland? It's technically their land, and they could definitely justify a land bridge to Kaliningrad, and would NATO attack if they did it?
There really isn't a good justification to connecting Kaliningrad to Russia, because there is no way to do it. Like, if they close off the Suwalki Gap, they just connected Russia to Belarus, which is a totally different country still, so not Russia. So there really is no way for them to connect Kaliningrad to anything that's Russian. There's also no good justification for it, because in between Kaliningrad and quote-unquote Russia, as the question poses, there is the countries of Lithuania and Poland, whose sovereign territory includes the Suwalki Gap. So there really isn't a good justification to make, because we have a great justification right now in America to say that all of Eastern Russia is ours for security reasons, but that doesn't mean that that's an actual justification, because by international law, that's Russia's sovereign territory and a part of their country. So that would be a bit of the issue as into why the justification would be a bad one. One, they could never even connect it to Russia. They would just be connecting it to Belarus. And two, the Polish and Lithuanians own that land, so it's not really a good justification still. Because Hitler had this crazy justification that because there was German-speaking people somewhere in Eastern Europe, that all of that was theirs, and that didn't really hold up too well, because there was a whole bunch of other people there, like the Soviets, and the Americans, the British, and the French, as well as the Polish, and everyone else, who kind of disagree with that, and ended up making a bit of a problem about it. They call it World War II. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to David Bradshaw. He said, I got a question about how this would work with the sanctions. If Congress would pass a sanctions bill to bypass the president, I think if enough sign it, he can't veto it, right? And basically the way that would work is Congress can pass a bill sanctioning the Russian Federation with secondary sanctions, but it still has to go to the president's desk. The president can choose to veto it, or he can sign it into law, and the sanctions get put on Russia. The problem is, if the president vetoes the bill, then it's up to Congress to, let's see, let me go double check this real quick.
I think they have to get a 2/3 majority or greater at that point to overrule the president's veto.
So to override a presidential veto, they can still impose the sanctions without the president's approval, but they'd have to pass the bill with a 2/3 majority in both the Senate and the House to override the veto. So it's quite a doozy of a process there to override it. So in other words, in practicality, it's not getting overridden. That's the truth of the matter. And if the president does not want the sanctions to be done, the sanctions are not happening. There's pretty much nothing Congress can do about it because of the current political makeup of the current Congress. So there's really no bypassing the president. He has the final say because of the political landscape right now. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that pretty much addressed that dead on the nail. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Diane Merriam, who said, it's not an urgent item, but how well is Crimea doing since they lost their freshwater connection when the Russians blew the Kakhovka Dam?
Apparently, they're doing somewhat well. The Russians actually import water into Crimea, but there are strict water conservation regimens that they have to put in place to make sure that the water that is there is conserved. But they are doing okay. It's just that pretty much most agriculture has ceased to exist in Crimea, and Crimea has returned to what it was historically throughout most of history, kind of like a bit of a arid sort of a peninsula, kind of a wasteland in terms of usable farmland. But I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Avari Mandabratis. He said, what do you think the effect will be on the Venezuelan economy if the U.S. can surgically remove Maduro from power and help the opposition form a temporary government in advance of elections?
Let's see. The U.S. can surgically. I think that the economy would massively improve because under Venezuela's current socialist economic system, they have suffered terribly. So really, at this point, anything would bring Venezuela up from there. They're pretty much at rock bottom. So if an interim government came in and Maduro was removed, and then they started to bring forward capitalist economic principles, the Venezuelan economy would immediately start to flourish. And of course, it's not going to become a $1 trillion economy overnight, but compared to where they're at right now, there would be a far greater amount of money flowing through Venezuela and also a greater deal of well-paying jobs in the country, which would improve the economic situation pretty much overnight. So I hope that does address that the best I can, at least from what I would know. But the outcome for Venezuela, if Maduro is removed and the socialist economic principles are also completely lifted, it generally would be a major positive output for Venezuela, more so than a negative one. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, and we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one is going to go to Kugli, who said, Enforcers, I have a question for you because I know you know your weapons. I've read a lot of comments recently, and smart and knowledgeable people 100% are calling it iron sights or open sights. It's sights, question mark.
I call it iron sights, or irons. That's why I kind of call it.
People call it open sights? I've never heard they called that before.
I've never heard it called open sights either. I've always just heard iron sights. Everyone that I've heard of in the military that went through their rifle training, they call them irons or iron sights. But I call them iron sights, or irons for short, because that's what they are. They're just, they're your normal type of iron sights mounted usually onto the rifle. Some ARs in the modern day, though, weirdly enough, actually do not have pre-installed or dead on, like bolted on iron sights, so you kind of have to like get them added onto a Picatinny rail. At least the rear sight you do, but outside
on my rifle it's the front post and the rear.
Like in the rear post is like bolted on, or is it like a Picatinny rail installation sort of thing?
Both of the pieces of the iron sight system have to be put on the Picatinny rail, like with manual, like you have to do it yourself.
Yeah, because an M4A1 carbine, like the ones that you would see in the Army, the front post of the iron sight is right here, and the rear post has to be attached to the Picatinny, and you push a little button on it and it'll pop up. But I call it an iron sight because it's made of iron. It's not an advanced optic of any kind that uses any sort of refractory or anything like that, like, say, an ACOG or like any sort of a holographic sight. So I call them iron sights. That's what I've called them. Let's see. And I see someone saying open sights or iron sights that aren't enclosed. That's interesting to me because I still haven't heard it called that ever. Because there are sights that I've used that are what you would call an open sight by that definition. I still hear people calling them iron sights. Like, for example, the battle sights on a 1903. I've just heard people call that the battle sight, but that's still an iron sight, according to most people. And I'll show you all the rifle here, 1903. And I want to find one of the earlier variants that didn't have the 1903 A3's rear post. Let me find one like this right here. Unfortunately, I don't know what make of 1903 that is because there was loads of people who made them over the years. Mine's a Remington. But that right there is the ladder sight. You can flip that up, and it has a little peep sight on it. All iron sights, of course, and you can adjust that peep sight to the specific range that you would want in yards. But if you flip that ladder sight down, there is what's called the battle sight, which is automatically zeroed in at 550 yards, if I'm not mistaken. It's like, I think it's like 552 or something, but it's around 550 yards. Back then, they did not expect close-in shooting on the sights whatsoever, so the zero was at 550 yards, not 100 like it would be on most modern rifles. And I've still heard people call that an iron sight, but that sounds like one of those philosophical questions, to be honest, in like the gun world, where you're going to get a different answer from everyone, because there really isn't a clear answer to a lot of things in the gun world like there should be. Like, there's not like a lot of standardized stuff. Some people will say that a clip is a magazine and a magazine is a clip, or an in block is a clip. You know, and you get endless stuff like that, and people arguing it back and forth. And to, you know, whoever's arguing it, there's a clear answer, but to the other person, there's a completely different answer. It's kind of like politics in that sense, where everyone has a clear answer to everything, but nobody agrees on the clear answers that everyone came up to. So I would say it's
What's
an
your
iron sight.
setup? What's your setup for the home defense rifle? Are you going iron sights, optic, laser? Like, what's your system?
Honestly, for close ranges like that, optics don't really make too much sense to me. Because to me, an optic is like, I don't really find a point, just to explain this to people, in having holographic sights that are like 1 times magnification, because it's like, that's just adding hundreds of dollars to your setup for really no benefit. Because iron sights literally do the same thing, and in my opinion, a little bit better. And that's very much my opinion. A lot of people say it's really hard to shoot with iron sights, but I also don't understand why those people say that. However, if I was to have a home defense setup, it would be something like an AK, you know, because, you know, it's not getting grime on it or anything, so all of them work the same. An AK or an M4 with iron sights, that's what I'd use. It's easy, it's efficient, you know, and also there's really no way to mess that up, at least in my opinion. That's what I would do, though.
Yeah, me personally, depending on which one I'm going for, because I have my 2 main weapons. I have the M4A1 Daniel, and I've got the Honey Badger. For close quarters, Honey Badger is going to be much better for home defense because it's got a much shorter barrel, so that's probably much better for home defense. Me personally, I go with all 3. I've got the hollow sight, I've got the iron sights, and I've got the laser. So I've got all 3 of them. On the Daniel, I've got all 3. On the Badger, I've got the hollow sight and I've got the laser, but not the iron sights.
But, you know, for me, like, the M4 is fine, like an M4A1, because, and also, by the way, folks, I want to make it clear, mine's a semi-auto. It's an M4A1 that is semi-automatic. So a lot of people also argue, is it even an M4? Technically it is, because the M4 is the carbine variant of an AR-15. So it is an M4. It's just not, it doesn't have select fire options on it. It's just single or safe. But beyond that, this is what I have. I have mine set up like one that you would see an infantryman use in the 3rd Armored Division, literally down to the T. So it has the same Knight's Armory vertical foregrip. Let me see if I can show y'all one of those. Let's see. That's not my loadout. I'm trying to see if I can find one that is in the U.S. Army. Oh, geez. I don't think I will be able to. Yeah, they're all a little different. Every single unit has, like, slight variants, by the way, of what they modify their rifles with. Let me just pull up the FN M4A1, because that's what I have exactly. So, this is mine. And the only thing I added to mine, because this is the only thing I could find that was added to it in the 3rd Brigade, was, I believe, a flashlight, like a standard flashlight, and also a Trichicon ACOG. So that's my loadout for an M4. But if you're talking about home defense, like incredibly short ranges, ACOGs are pointless. That's really goofy to have a 4 times magnification ACOG for a 20-yard distance. That makes no sense. So it would just be an iron sight. It would literally be this loadout, and that's it, with a flashlight attached.
Yeah, I gotta have a flashlight too. Like I have a flashlight on all my rifles. If honestly, if I could, I would get that Maul. You know what I'm talking about? It's like the EOTech Maul system or whatever, that with like the laser and flashlight integration and stuff.
Uh-huh.
I think it even has infrared in it.
Man, that actually would be pretty cool. Like that would be a
Those are
pretty.
expensive as hell though. Like, let me go see here. Maul. No, that's not EOTech actually. That's B.E. Myers. So totally different. But yeah, the Maul, the advanced laser weapon. So it's just a Oh, is it? Wait a minute, this is a different mall. This is not the one I'm talking about. There's like an all-inclusive one that has like all the different stuff in it, but I'm not sure which one that is. I can't find it right now. But yeah, those like the gun accessories get crazy expensive. That's the problem with that. Like you really can't go too crazy getting a gun out, or you start spending more than the gun, which is kind of wild. So I just usually gone simple, like with all the stuff I put on mine. The optics the only thing that I actually spend money on because you want to have that right.
Yeah, that's true. Also, I see some people saying they would use an M1 Garand. I actually have a couple of these. I collect them. Well, did collect them. I haven't really been collecting a lot of guns recently. I just kind of sit around on the ones I have. I'm fine with them. But I do have a couple of these. I don't really know about that for home defense though, because a 30-06 is a pretty damn powerful round, and I don't really know if that would be a and also with the length of this thing, because Garands are not short, like they're pretty long. So I don't really know how this thing would do, like in a house in a cramped space with some burglar you don't even know where they are, or a home intruder or whatever, wandering around, and then
It's no good.
you're going to blow your eardrums out. Like honestly, at that point, I would say like if you're going for something of that era, the M1 carbine would probably be a better pick. It's smaller, it's lighter. It fires a
What
30 caliber
caliber?
round. It's a 30 caliber actually.
Oh, you got to be careful with over penetration on the walls though. Like for home defense, you don't want something that's going to blast through like multiple different walls because that's putting other people at risk than just the intruder. So, that's one thing right there. Like for me, like the Badger with the subsonic 300, that seems like a decent home defense round. But you don't want to have like 7.62 or something as your home defense round. That's not going to be good.
I'm trying to see here really quickly, folks, because it's the carbine, the M1 carbine is by the Army's name. I think it was something like a caliber 30 carbine M1, something like that. Everything was called M1 in World War II, and I'm forgetting the exact round. And I have them. Like I just forgot what the exact caliber is, but it's a good bit smaller than a 30-06. It's a 30 caliber, but it is not the same round as a 30-06. It's a good bit smaller. It's more like a 30 caliber pistol round. But a lot of people said, from like their time in Italy and Korea and France, that these things weren't long range, but within like 300 yards they were a pack-a-punch, but not to the point of like a Garand or anything like that. And they're also insanely light and really small. So I would say like if you're going for an era sort of a time like that, like like a Garand sort of a type gun, this is way better. Like they're more expensive to find out there, but way better in my opinion for that sort of a situation. But a Garand would be a little too much because you don't want to have overpin and have stuff like blasting through the walls, getting the neighbor's dog, and all that sort of a deal. That's too much. Like that's way too much. That's also why I wouldn't use a shotgun either, because a shotgun with buckshot will do the same, and that's not good business. Because then there's going to be a lot of collateral, and you generally want to cut down on collateral. Like, it's a home invader, so it's like a life or death sort of a situation at that point. But at the same time, you don't want to make it a life or death situation for your neighbors either. You want to have them in mind and have something that's not going to overpin and do something crazy, But anyways, that would be my 2 cents on that, at least in my opinion, about how home defense would work or what I would pick. I would pick an M4 carbine or, I mean, like, if you had this option, and this one is one that's a little bit out there, but an AKS-74U, which is really, really small, and these are pretty neat, like, at least to me. Like, they're Soviet in design, based off of the AK. This is Pushkin's redesign, and a carbine form of that, of the AKM. So, I mean, it's a little bit out there, and these are going to
That's
be
7.62 though, isn't it?
545, actually, 545 by 39.
Man, you're still chopping down the 2x4s in the house though with that. Like that's that's a little much.
Well, I mean, but if you're using what were you saying earlier, the honey badger or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, Honey Badger 300 suppressed. I mean, that's not got a lot of that does not have a lot of velocity behind it. Like it wouldn't go through too many walls.
Well, yeah, but I mean, an M4 carbine is going to be, punching. Like this thing. I think it has a 6-inch barrel, if I'm not mistaken. So average size, but it wouldn't be doing that much pen because there's not a lot of velocity behind the bullet because it hardly has a barrel. You know, it's an incredibly short barrel.
You know, it's still a big round though, and it's got a lot of punch behind it. Like the honey badger barrel, 6 inches, I think, on the honey badger as well, and it's got like a very can't remember the rifling on it or whatever in the barrel. I keep all those specs straight, but it's got a short barrel like that too. But it's all in the power behind the round, and this is still a heavy ass round, like even with a 6 inch barrel.
I mean, it's smaller though. It's lighter than a 5.56. You know.
You think so?
No, I don't think so. I know, and like in terms of grains, it's lighter.
Well, I mean, I still say it's a lot more powerful than the Badger's 300 suppressed.
And also, I see some people saying, "Isn't this thing illegal?" No, it's not. Like, it's a nuance, though. Yes, this is illegal to own as a normal gun, but if you get a $200 tax stamp, you sit around for like nowadays it's like 3 days or something. It's hardly even any time at all. You can get this thing as an SBR because this thing by every definition is an SBR. Every single AKS-74U has a folding stock. And also on top of that, the barrel is incredibly short, and it's firing a rifle caliber round. And according to the wonky rules of the ATF, this thing is 100% an SBR. Honestly, this thing is an SBR even without the wonky rules of the ATF because it is quite literally a short-barreled rifle. So this thing requires a tax stamp, and they're also incredibly expensive to find because there's not a lot of these in America. So these things run usually around $3.5 to $5,000 to get in that configuration with nothing attached. So you could find
I
a
wouldn't
lot.
pay that for that. That Kalashnikov trash, I wouldn't pay that for that.
Oh, get the hell out of
That's
here!
crazy.
Dude. These things are cool. Like
Man, these things are
cheap.
junk. Like these things are junk. Like these. Also, that price is junk too. It's like this is not what you'd call like a rifle. I'm like, oh, like that's like the top engineering right there. These are like, you know, the warlords are grabbing these and stuff like that. These things right here. I don't understand the appeal of it. Honestly, I don't get it.
I find them neat, folks. I'll say the AK isn't the greatest system platform out there, but they are cool, and so for that reason, I think they're neat. But you know, like if you really wanted something overkill for the home defense situation, I would go with the Fusil Automatique Légère, which is the FAL. This thing is definitely overkill.
Oh my god! And also, this is not for home defense. You see how long that thing is?
This is quite literally a battle rifle. It fires a 308 round. It has, I think, a 21-inch barrel normally. You can get some that are 16-inch barrels, but I think that's the paratrooper model, if I'm not mistaken. But the conventional ones have a 21-inch barrel, a carry handle, a 20-round 308 magazine. You can get 30 rounders, but those are insanely long. And I mean, they are just these things though. I got to be honest with y'all. I absolutely love FALs because they are like the Rolls Royce of semi-automatic 308s. They're so smooth. They're so nice. Their ergonomics is great. Some people complain about this really backwards bent pistol grip. I personally have no problem with it. I think it's really nice. But if you have some wrist issues, then it's going to be a bit of a problem. But these things are just absolutely the cat's meow when it comes to semi-automatic 308s. I think they're just wonderful and really cool.
Yeah. You might as well have a Bofors at that point if you're going to use that.
Actually, the Germans had the G1, which was their version. They didn't have it for long due to politics reasons, but this is the G1, and they actually have a flip-down bipod that's built onto that rifle. So, in a sense, it really does feel like when you shoot this thing, like kneeling or prone or anywhere where you can get it, like a support for it, this thing really does feel like you're shooting a machine gun because of the bipod on it. It's really cool, though. But, like, this thing is the neatest. Also, let's see. If you wanted a really smooth firing AK, there are some. You can get the KG WZ60. And let me see if this will pull it up. Yeah, here we go. This is the Polish AKM. This is the specifically Polish made one. This one is a grenade launcher. Kind of weird like that, but you can actually see it right there. You can mount anti-tank grenades on these things, and they work. You can actually see them in North Korea. North Korea bought a load of these things from Poland back in the day during the Cold War, and they still have them to this day. But these things are really cool, and they're also really smooth. Like, I would say that for the AK world, out of my experience with AKs, for the smoothness of this AKM, I'd say it's like the Cadillac of the AKs. Very smooth, very well fine-tuned, and it's also Polish, so you know the quality's there, because the Polish are pretty decently ended on their quality side of stuff. Also, by the way, that's what it looks like with the grenade attached.
Oh, damn. That looks like something North Korea would use.
Yeah, it does. They replaced this thing with the RPG-72, which is actually no, the Polish anti-tank launcher. Let me see if I can find it. It's a little crappy little like spigot looking thing, and it's just bizarre. It's the bizarrest thing, but they replaced it because it was cheap. And that's why they wanted it. And I cannot find this thing. It replaced the KGWC-60 in service, but I cannot find it here.
Oh,
on
I
this
look at that
page.
stealth tank. The stealth tank was nice though, right up there.
You know, they scratched this thing, like they got rid of the program.
Yeah, but they put it in GTA 5 before they scrapped it though.
Yeah, they did do that. Pretty cool. Like it's pretty cool, but they got rid of it. And also, let's see, someone said 44 Magnum is life. I love 44 Magnum. That's a really cool one. I actually have a Colt Anaconda with a 6-inch barrel. Like this one. Like literally, it's that one. And I think these things are so cool. Actually, that's not a 6-inch barrel. That's like an 8-inch barrel. This is what mine looks like. I think they're great. Some people complain that 44 Magnum has too much kick, and I say that they have soft hands. A 44 Magnum is totally fine. The kick is strong, but if you got good wrists, you know, like manly wrists, then you'll be fine. And I'm pretty accurate with these, so I like them a lot. And I also just like, I kind of like the intimidation factor that comes with them, like for the most part, because when people hear 44 Magnum, they know Dirty Harry. And when you show up to like a gun range with one of these things, everyone there is like, oh my god, it's a 44 Magnum. And when you shoot the thing, it rocks the whole building. It's literally like a cannon. Like I just think they're really cool. Like honestly, for the fascination side, that's 44 Magnum. I really like these. I think they're really cool. And honestly, I'll swear by the Colt Anaconda, because I know a lot of people in the gun world also complain about Colt and how they had like a whole bunch of quality control issues in their 3rd and 2nd generation Colt pistols that were made recently. Mine's a 4th generation Colt Anaconda, and I have not had a single issue with it. It runs like a sewing machine. So I think Colt's fixed a lot of their quality control problems that a lot of people were complaining about, and it's pretty cool. So that's I would have to agree with you. 44 Magnum is pretty goated. I think it's neat. But anyways, with that, I think it's time for us folks to move on to the final question of the night. And so, who was the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is Value Radar, who said, did you know that Iceland is responsible for sovereign nations having 200 nautical miles of exclusive economic zone from their shores, and we fought 3 wars with the UK for it?
The COD Wars. Yes, I do know of the COD Wars, and the COD Wars are pretty cool because let me see here. Yeah, the COD Wars. And this is what they were able to expand their exclusive economic zone into, was what's in the dark blue. And it's because there was a whole bunch of arguments between the British and the Icelanders about who controlled the waters and who could fish in them for the cod. And there were so many standoffs. This went to the United Nations so many times, each and every time it changed how far exclusive economic zones go. So, really cool fact, actually, and you are absolutely correct on that, and it's a really interesting part of history. Not a single shot was fired in the COD Wars, but they were such tense standoffs, it actually created an international crisis of a sort that was decided by the United Nations every single time, and they would end up extending the international waters. Well, not the international waters, but the exclusive economic zones. But still, pretty neat stuff. And I did know about that. Really cool part of history. But anyways, with that, folks, I hope that does address that the best that we can. And it's time for us to round this thing out for the night. I got to thank you all so much once again for watching. We had a peak viewership tonight of 16,000 people for 2 minutes. And we had a total viewership of 92,000 people. I have to thank you all so much once again for watching. It has once again been an honor and a pleasure to be able to run the stream for all of y'all. And we will see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours, well, actually 48 hours, of news from around the world. Oh, by the way, one more thing. A big shout out to everyone who supported the fundraiser tonight for raising $3,380 for Razom For Ukraine. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, Hurram Slava, and long live the Spring Army, and long live the Republic.
And with that, folks, like the Enforcer said, a big shout out to everybody tonight for helping us to raise almost $3,400 raised on the goal, which is only $2,500. We got all the way up to $3,400 almost, and that is very fantastic to see right there. And also, we will see you on Tuesday night at 10 p.m. Eastern for the next Nightly War News stream. And tomorrow, if there is enough news to cover, there will be a midday short war video. I believe tomorrow's my day on that one, so if there is one, you'll be hearing from me tomorrow on that video. But in the meantime, folks, thank you all for watching, and of course, Slava Ukraine, Heroem Slava, get some rest, and good night.